Today's date is October 17th. The time is 7:06 p.m. Ms. Lee, would you please call roll?
Commissioner Allenby.
Present.
Palomita.
Here.
Matthews.
Here.
Ellis, I understand, is on his way. Pritchett.
Present.
Ramsey.
Here.
Commissioner Roberts said he won't be able to make it. Commissioner Sherman has an excused absence. Commissioner Yampolsky is not here.
Also present today is the PRC officer, Ms. Catherine Lee, and from the Berkeley Police Department, we have Sergeant Rashawn Cummings, Sergeant Cesar Melero, and Sergeant Spencer Fomby, who will be doing our presentation today. We can now move into public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to make comment at this time? As a reminder, you have 3 minutes. Seeing as there's no public comment at this time, we can move right into the
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Some faces are very familiar to me. I met some of you recently, and there's a few of you that have been on board. Spencer Fomby from Berkeley PD. I've been here since 2000. Fortunately, I don't have to come before PRC very often, so you probably haven't seen me in years at any type of official meeting. So, I'm sorry, what's your name?
What's that?
What's your name?
Today.
Okay. And how long have you been on PRC?
4 months.
4 months.
Under 4 months.
All right. And Elvis. Quit out?
Yeah.
Okay. How long have you been here?
Almost 2 years.
Okay. What we're going to do now, we're going to talk about a class that I created for Berkeley PD. It's called Tactics of De-Escalation. The general concept is teaching police officers how to manage people who are in mental health crisis, people who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, people who are otherwise acting violently, and to try to manage that crisis without using deadly force. So that's the general concept. We'll talk about some of my background. So I earned my bachelor's degree in Administration of Justice from Howard University. I've been in BPD, like I said, since 2000. My primary assignments have been in control, narcotics, and I spent 8 years of my career as a community law policing officer. So full-time, working in the community, talking to community groups, working on long-term problems in the community. And we also have ancillary duties, part-time duties in the police department. One of mine is the special response team, so I've been on the special response team for 14 years. I'm currently the team leader and lead instructor. I've been in that role for about 7 years. I've also been a youth support instructor since 2007. On the bottom of the screen you see a lot of things that I'm certified to teach. So I have about 13 youth support instructor certifications. So there's different disciplines from hand-to-hand combat, firearms, chemical agents, basically everything that police officers use to apply force, I'm certified to teach. In my career, I've been involved in 4 incidents that have ended in officer-involved shootings. One of those times, I was the shooter. I was involved in a shootout with a suspect in 2010. Outside of BPD, I'm an instructor and a consultant for the National Tactical Officers Association, which is basically the national SWAT organization. That organization looks to certify SWAT tactics, to determine best practices, standardize the equipment and the tactics that SWAT officers use. I'm also an instructor and consultant for a Bureau of Justice Assistance program called VALOR. That is a program to increase officer safety and the safety of the community, people in the community who we come in contact with. I'm a subject matter expert for National Institute of Justice Special Technical Committee on civil disturbance units. So there is a committee. I was asked to join this national committee to standardize practices for how police deal with civil disturbances, the type of equipment we use, the tactics, and the procedures. And I'm also a visiting fellow at the University of Derby in the UK. So I was over there. They flew me to Derby last December to do a presentation on crowd control. I decided to give you a little bit of information about my personal background just for context. Some of you may have read the book by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me. Ta-Nehisi Coates and I were at Howard at the same time. If you read the book, you probably heard about Prince Jones. Prince was one of my friends. So Prince was killed when I was in the police academy. So imagine my sister sends me a message. Did you hear about Prince? She sends me the news article, read the article, and asked to read to my academy classmates. which in hindsight was probably kind of a weird request from one of the academy students. Say, I want to read this article about my friend that was just killed by a police officer. So if you don't know the story, in general, Prince was the kind of kid, he was what we would call, in the streets would call square. He came from a family of educated professionals, never been in trouble, went to boarding school and private school, that kind of kid, ended up going to Howard. Very religious, never been in trouble. Definitely wasn't somebody that you would ever believe would be killed by a police officer. On the night that Prince died, he was on his way to visit his fiance. The vehicle he was driving matched the description of a vehicle that was involved, a suspect that was involved in stealing a gun. Undercover police officer, dressed like a crook in an undercover car, starts following Prince, follows him from suburban Maryland into DC into Northern Virginia. Prince recognizes that this person is following him, tries to lose him in the neighborhood, basically gets stuck. The officer blocks Prince in, jumps out of his car, pulls a gun and not a badge. Prince backs up to try to get away. The officer shoots into Prince's car and kills him, and claims that he feared for his life because Prince drove his car into the officer's car. The officer was never disciplined. He's still working as a police officer, as I understand it. The only real outcome of that was there was a civil lawsuit that will support Prince's daughter. Prince is a person, this incident made all of us, my peers, feel vulnerable. Because we're that small percentage in the neighborhood that made it out, got away, went to Howard. We have friends that grew up in gangs and drugs, and I know people growing up that have been killed, have killed people who have been in prison. So you have this small group of people, 10,000 undergrad, that are going to the most prestigious historically black college and university or in the United States, and then one of us gets killed by a police officer. So that shook us. It still pisses me off to this day, talking about it 18 years later. So on the other side, my experience in criminal justice, this is one of my other friends from Howard. He just pled guilty to triple murder in suburban Maryland. This is a person who went to Howard, earned an MBA. He's a professional. Got into a business dispute with some people. They were opening a restaurant. Got into a dispute with them. During the dispute, there's the 3 people left at the end of the night. Carleave goes out to his car, gets a pistol, comes back in, and kills them. It's captured on video. So again, my sister sent me a message. Spencer, you check the news, something happened with Leaf. So I look up and I check the news, sure enough. Now, I have the same feeling as a police officer. I deal with families of suspects all the time. And a lot of times they'll say, you guys had it all wrong, my son would never do this, my family member would never do this. And I felt the same way, for good reason. But he did it. And as a public safety official, I have to look out and say, okay, the victims are the priority here. And especially like my friend, he has to pay his debt to society. So on November 9th, he will be sentenced for triple murder. A person who was promising and had everything going for him, and his life is going away. So I wanted to tell you that, so when you see police officers, don't get bogged down by the uniform. We have real stories. We are part of the community, we're part of society. We are all affected by all of this, okay? So whether my friend is killed by a police officer or my friend is the suspect in killing 3 people. One part of the story I forgot to tell you, when the police found him, he ran from the officers with a gun. Ran into a wooded area and shot himself twice. The officers arrested him and saved his life. So then again, it's like, my friend tried to commit suicide. I'm glad he didn't try to kill the cops. And there's all these emotions, all these things going through my head. So I share that to tell you, when you see officers, again, don't look at us as robots in uniforms. We all have stories, and these are just 2 of mine. So what we're talking about in this class when we teach police officers Since the Michael Brown shooting, there's been increased scrutiny of law enforcement. The primary concern is how police deal with unarmed, non-compliant suspects or suspects armed with a weapon other than a firearm. So in general, that is what the public is asking us. Why can't you guys arrest people without killing them? Why can't you guys arrest people who are unarmed without using deadly force? Some of you may have heard of Police Executive Review Forum called PERF. PERF is a DC-based think tank that looks to establish policing policies and best practices. About 2 years ago, our chief sent me to a meeting in DC that PERF was holding, and they came out with their guidelines for use of force. I came back from that meeting and presented to the chief of police and to the executive command staff some of the principles that PERF was looking to implement. One of them was de-escalation. I looked in the California Peace Officer Standards and Training catalog to see if I could find a de-escalation class in California, and there was none. The only thing that was available was an online training that was about 2 hours that basically taught officers verbal de-escalation. And based on what I know of tactics and how things happen in the field, I knew that that was not what we needed. So I created a class. So I created an 8-hour California post-approved tactical de-escalation class. The class emphasizes the use of crisis intervention team members, negotiators, because we have professional negotiators that are assigned to a special response team. And then we also have Berkeley mobile crisis clinicians who are in the field with us. So we want to have those professionals or people who have extra training to show up to these scenes of crisis. Obviously, we want to use verbal de-escalation whenever possible. We want to teach the officers how to talk to people, how to reduce the conflict by using words instead of violence. We want the officers to be aware of suicide by cop. So this is a real phenomenon. We have experienced it here. We have had people, I've been involved in many situations where a person has tried to get us to shoot them. And we find out later on the person is unarmed or in crisis. And officers around the country need to be aware of the signs that a person is attempting suicide by cop and how to avoid being their means of suicide. The use of less lethal options. So we'll talk more in depth about that, but I'm surprised as I go around the country how many departments do not provide their officers with less lethal options. It's actually pretty shocking. They expect the officers to go out and deal with people with knives and machetes and baseball bats and all kinds of weapons, or just people who are out of control and non-compliant, but they don't have the tools to fight with. We emphasize the use of sound tactics, so we want the officers to slow down when they can, keep their distance, use cover. Whenever possible, only one officer talks to the subject, so it's not confusing. We want to stage medical, meaning get the fire department or the ambulance to be on scene before we have a physical confrontation. And we want to work together as a team. And then what was really missing from the trainings that I found online is there was no scenario-based training. So we put our officers through scenarios where they have to actually do this. They have to talk to a role player. Somebody has to get the less lethal weapon. People have to practice keeping their distance. They have to practice dealing with a crowd or a hostile crowd that's showing up on the scene. Those are the things that I thought were important to have in a class. Based on the class, Berkeley did a story, and then there was a lot of interest, really from around the country. People started contacting me. So we have trained officers from 7 outside agencies in the Bay Area. I've done this presentation for the University of Derby in the UK. Every year, I'm part of the Law and Social Justice class at Berkeley High. So we do a 3-day training on tactical de-escalation and police use of force. This year, I did a presentation at the National Alliance of Mental Illness, or NAMI. They had a conference in Monterey, and I did a presentation, this topic, for mental health clinicians, family members, former people who had been 5150, people who had been detained by the police on mental health holds, and presented the way that we want police officers to act, the way we want police officers to react to these situations from their perspective. And I learned a lot. I probably learned as much talking to them as they did listening to me. I just did a presentation for the National Asian Peace Officers Association. They held their conference this year in San Francisco. And then over the past couple of years, I've shared the curriculum and other materials I have with PERF. LAPD was at the presentation for the National Asian Peace Officers Association. They are creating their own de-escalation training. They asked for my class to help supplement theirs. Oka PD, Raleigh PD, and then Roanoke PD also in Virginia. So some of the tactical principles: contact and cover. Essentially what that means is on any contact, if there are more than one officer will be the primary officer, meaning the contact officer. The other officer's job primarily is the safety of the contact officer. That's the cover officer. We want officers to use cover whenever possible. So if you're dealing with a person who's standing out in the open with a knife, why are you standing close to that person? Get behind a car, get behind a wall, keep your distance, and use cover. If you watch videos of confrontations between police and the public, a lot of times you see the officers backing up, backpedaling, and the officer will fall. And if the officer has a gun in their hand and the person is advancing, the officer will then probably use force to protect him or herself. So we tell officers, when you can, try not to backpedal, try to use lateral movement, or turn and move forward as you get away instead of backing up. As they're moving around, we want the officers to identify escape routes. So we train the officers, as you're walking up to a house, think, if a person comes out right now and attacks me, where am I going? The last thing you want to do is be surprised and try to make it up in the moment. You want to identify, okay, I can't go right, so make sure that I can go left and escape if something goes wrong. Talked about clear communication and when officers talking. One of my pet peeves, sometimes less is more. So a lot of times we talk to the public and they say, why are so many cops? Why? And in certain situations, I agree. Now this is the balance. It is safer for several of us to try to physically control one person than it is for me. I'm confident in my ability, but if I try to arrest one person, put them in handcuffs by myself, I'm going to use a lot more force. It's just the reality. I'm going to probably have to hurt that person to get them into handcuffs. If I have more officers with me, then all we have to do is focus on one limb. I have the left arm, you hit the right, you hit the legs, and it's safer for us. It's safer for this subject. But then, there's a threshold. At a certain point, there's just way too many people on scene, and we need to be able to recognize that. As a street supervisor, as sergeants, we're the ones in charge of looking at the scene and saying, okay, I have enough people here, nobody else show up, or you guys can go back in service. We have enough people. Some of the support roles we need: less lethal, traffic and crowd control. We want to keep vehicles out of the way. Sometimes these confrontations spill out into traffic. And we want to manage crowds that show up. People have a right to observe, they have a right to videotape, they have a right to be there. But we have to manage the distance and the proximity to the confrontation. That can be tricky sometimes. So what we know is we have people who are interested, they want to know what's going on, they want to document what's going on, and they have a right to do that. Sometimes that confrontation between police and the observers makes the whole situation more dangerous. So we're always trying to manage their right to watch and observe and managing the situation. And then support and arrest teams. Those are the support goals we have. So what is de-escalation? We hear the term thrown around a lot, but a lot of times people don't really know what it means. So de-escalation more broadly refers to the strategic slowing down of an incident in a manner that allows officers more time, distance, space, and tactical flexibility during dynamic situations on the street. Essentially what it means is, if you can slow things down, if you can maintain and manage the space, you have more options, and it's more likely to end safely. The trigger for application of de-escalation tactics occurs when police action is not immediately necessary. So what we want police officers to recognize is, if you don't have to take action right now, you don't have to use force to stop somebody from hurting somebody else or hurting yourself, then try to de-escalate. There are times when that's not an option. We'll talk about that here. Officers should attempt to use de-escalation tactics unless doing so violates the priorities of life. We'll talk about that concept here in a second. Or compromises officer safety. The officer should be trying to manage situations without using deadly force, but they're not sacrificial lambs. So we talk to people all the time and say, you signed up to be a police officer, you knew what you were getting into, that's a part of your job. And that is not true, okay? We are not here to get injured or get killed. So officer safety is still a priority for us. These tactics can reduce use of force against people in mental health crisis, people under the influence of drugs or alcohol, armed and unarmed non-compliant suspects. So before I was a police officer, my dad was in the military. My dad was a pretty hardcore guy. He didn't take any nonsense, and I followed rules. And I thought other people followed rules. Like I never would have thought of talking back to a police officer or telling the officer, you know, fuck the police or anything like that. And when I became a police officer, I was like, oh, you know, I thought if I told you to stop it, you would stop it. No, people do not comply with police officers. Some people try to escape, some people try to fight, some people will try to hurt or kill a police officer. That's the reality. We need officers to understand that is part of your job. How do you manage that without using excessive force or using deadly force? So when I do this presentation outside of Berkeley, everybody knows about Berkeley, but they don't really know about Berkeley. Okay? Berkeley is a really small place. People think that Berkeley has millions of people. They think it's this huge place, right? We're a pretty small place. Right now, we have about 120,000 residents. That's it. We have about 1,000 people that are unhoused. We have about 1,000 people in our community every day, just who live on the street, who are part of our community, who are people that we come in contact with as police officers. We come in contact with people every day who live on the street. Okay, that's our reality. What about Berkeley PD? When I started here, we had about 200 officers. Right now, we're only authorized 181. We don't have anywhere near that many officers. I think we're about 135 or something. You probably have a report from the chief this morning. 156. Okay, 156 authorized, and then when we get down to how many people actually work, right? It's pretty bad right now. One of the things that people don't realize is we transport over 3 people a day for Welfare Institution Code 5150, which is an involuntary mental health hold. So we average about 3 transports a day. That doesn't mean we only contact 3 people who are in crisis a day. Those are just the people we transport. So it is a big draw on our resources. We have a mobile crisis team. I think they were established in 1974 or somewhere around there. When I go around the country, I hear people telling conferences, we're coming up with a novel concept. We're going to have mental health clinicians in the field with the police officers. And we just kind of look, you guys just got the memo? You need to have professionals in the field. I wish we had more. You know, when people say we need more, and I know that you talk about this all the time, we need more professional mental health clinicians in the field, we do. The number that we have right now, they're awesome, but we need 10 more. And crisis intervention team, we are in a process of trying to get everybody through the 40-hour class. I've been through it. I think it's extremely valuable training, and it's really important for the kind of work that we do. So BPD use of force. Our SWAT team is called the Special Response Team, or SRT. The team was created in 1976. Most people don't realize, you know, people say, oh, there's a new move towards militarization, and so we've had a team since 1976. So in our history, we've been involved in 2 officer-involved shootings. One was a Henry's incident that some of you are familiar with, and the last shooting we've been involved in was in 2002, which was a takeover robbery attempt on Alcatraz at Kramer's Style House. That's it. So, and when I say that, I'm saying our SRT, Special Response Team, people operating as a team in the gear, we've been involved in 2 shootings. The department hasn't been involved in a shooting since 2012. So I tell people, don't take credit for crime reduction, for reductions in crime. Don't take credit for a lack of officer-involved shootings. The reality is, we cannot control people that shoot at us or create those situations where we might have to use deadly force. There are a lot of things that we can control and try to reduce use of force. But I'm not taking credit for that. There are agencies that do everything that we do, and they come into contact with people who try to kill officers, and the officers get involved in shootings. Yes.
Do you just mean the SWAT team hasn't been involved since
The
2012?
SWAT team itself. So in on SWAT operations,
But there's been others.
that's 2012. So the SWAT team itself on a SWAT operation has not been involved in a shooting on a SWAT operation since 2002. The department, BPD, our last shooting was in 2012.
You didn't kill Mr. Stewart in 2014?
No, that's the last one, 2012. No, that's. BPD, we don't have tasers. Our less lethal options that we have available are 40 millimeter. We have another weapon system called FN303. I'll discuss those more in detail later. We have pepper spray and we have batons. This is an article that was in Berkeley side a couple years ago that said that mental health calls were a huge drain on our agency, and about 35% of the calls that we went on had some mental health component. Okay, so it is a big deal for us. When I do this presentation for police, as you can imagine, if I came into whatever you do for work, if I came into your job and said, man, you guys are totally messed up, you don't know what you're doing, we need to overhaul this thing, you would probably fold your arms and not be very receptive to the message, right? So when I teach police officers, this is one of the slides I use. So have you been in a situation where you would have been legally justified in using deadly force, but chose not to? Show of hands. And normally about 70% of the officers in the room will raise their hand. And then I'll ask officers to offer stories, volunteer stories about times when they were legally justified to use deadly force but did not. Now the reason I do that is to show them that they already de-escalate. There's some people that would tell you that police officers shoot every person they have a chance to. It's just not true. Legally, we are justified in using deadly force against people in very clear situations. Those situations present themselves pretty often. The officers are avoiding using deadly force. Which brings us to the Sanctity of Life. This is becoming part of police department policies. They're writing it in. In Berkeley, based on our track record, based on our use of force record, it's clear that we value life. We are not trying to kill people, but agencies are putting this in their policy, basically saying you should respect human life, you should treat people with respect. So I want to talk about a concept called the priorities of life. This is something that we use in policing to manage crisis, and a lot of people outside of our profession have never heard of it. So if you are at the scene of a crisis, say it's a school shooting, if you are a hostage or a victim, you are the most important person in the world to us. Our tactics, our approach, everything is based on saving you. If you are an innocent bystander, if you're there, but you haven't become a victim and you haven't become a hostage, then you're next. Then comes the lives of police officers, and then comes the life of the person who is the suspect, who's there shooting people or however, or creating chaos. So the way this might play out, if we use the Orlando nightclub shooting. So people have a general idea of what that was. So there's a person that goes to a packed nightclub and decides he's going to go into the nightclub with an assault rifle and shoot it up. He knows there's a uniformed police officer there. He gets on scene, he sees the police officer, they get into a shootout. The suspect goes inside the nightclub, starts shooting people. More officers come on scene, they make entry, begin to shoot out the suspect. The suspect goes into the bathroom and holds hostages. So if you are the on-scene commander, you show up to this scene and you see this chaos. People are running, carrying their friends. Police officers are running all over the place. You're hearing all the radio traffic about what's happening. And you learn that there's 40 people shot on a dance floor and 6 people held hostage in a bathroom. You're the commander. What's the priority? So we use the priorities of life to dictate that, okay? People held hostage, that's a big problem. But there's 40 people shot. What's the priority? So if you've ever, hopefully you've never seen this, but if you've seen somebody who's shot with a rifle, it's a devastating wound. So we know that we have to try to rescue those 40 people. That's our priority. We can lock down the bathroom, and the greater good is saving the 40 people who are injured versus the 6 people who are held hostage. Yes?
So, I'm sorry, so this is kind of a hierarchy that you've presented here, right?
Right.
So the hostages / victims, it's actually victims first and then the hostages.
Depending on the situation.
Oh,
Victims, if there are victims who don't have wounds that will cause them to bleed to death immediately, then maybe you focus on the hostages. That's what happened in the Henry's incident. There are people who are injured, but they weren't going to bleed to death, so the priority was the hostages. Every situation was different. So the way that it played out, they locked down the bathroom, they went in and started rescuing injured people, and then they made entry, got to shoot out the suspect. One of the officers got shot in the helmet and went down. The shot killed the suspect. So as we finished the process, rescue the rest of the hostages, get any other injured people out, we get our downed officer, and then the suspect was last. Right? So that's how we prioritize the tactical problem. One of the things that I encourage officers to do is, as painful as it can be as a professional, we don't necessarily want to hear all the critiques of police officers. So I'm one of those people, I'll read stories that are negative about law enforcement, and I'll read the comments, as long as I can. So I can take it. But I'll read the comments and I'll try to figure out what are the common themes? What are the valid points? What are the things that we can improve on as a profession? These are real comments from a story that happened in the Bay Area. So one person commented, maybe one shot to the leg or something can be understood, but 15 shots. And we know that people always look at the count, the number of shots fired, and there's a whole body of science behind how officers get involved in shootings, when they shoot, when they start shooting, when they stop shooting, what the perceptions are. We're not going to get into all that. But as police officers, and especially as trainers, we need to understand the public will always be focused on why did they shoot so many times. They lined up and shot a puny little guy with a knife. Chickens. Me and my little sister could have taken him. Another person they're talking about was armed with a knife. It just stabbed some people. He was standing there, he was still right with a knife. So what I'm hearing is the public thinks that we can run up, do some kind of martial arts, and get the knife out of the guy's hand. We know in the training world, in the world of police use of force, that that's not how things happen. But we should listen to that. We should hear the public. Why can't they use the beanbag rounds on his knife-wielding arm to get him to drop the knife? This is another common thing. Tactically, and with the abilities of the weapon system, that's just not something that's realistic. But that's something that's common. That is a common frame. So we should listen to it. We should try to figure out, is there a way to improve the performance of a less lethal weapon? Is there a way to have better results with the weapon? So if we're trying to be objective in everything we do, we should try to be objective. I have my biases as a police officer. I have my biases as a person who's known somebody who's been killed by a police officer. So I try to control that when I look at these incidents. One way to be objective, I thought, was to look at a study by an independent body. So the Washington Post did a study, and they counted all the people who were killed by police officers in 1 year. So in 2015, they counted up 990 people shot and killed by police. So their findings showed that 75% of the suspects were attacking an officer or another person prior to being shot. 28% were shooting an officer or someone else. 16% were attacking with other weapons or physical force. 31% were pointing a gun. So I think objectively we say the vast majority of people who were shot and killed by police that year were attacking somebody or attacking the police. One of the things that stood out to me is a quarter of those people were experiencing mental health or emotional crisis. So there is that connection again with CIT, mental health. And what I take away from this is, even at the NAMI conference, talking to clinicians and family members, my goal in law enforcement would be to minimize the number of times that people come into contact with police officers when they're in crisis. And we should all be working toward trying to reduce the number of times that police officers come into contact with people in crisis. Weapons. 50% of the suspects had guns, 16% of suspects had knives, 5% tried to hit officers with vehicles, 3% had something that looked like a firearm. My focus on this is 9% of the shootings involve people who are unarmed. So how do we reduce the number of people that are killed by police officers when they don't have a weapon? So we're going to go through quickly law and policy. When police officers are trained to use force, there are two main cases that we look at. Graham versus Garner, which was decided by the Supreme Court in 1989, which established a reasonable officer standard. And that generally says, would another officer with the same or similar training and experience, facing the same or similar circumstances, act the same way or use similar judgment? Not necessarily the best decision, only a reasonable decision. That evaluation has to be judged through the perspective of a reasonable officer, based on the totality of facts known to the officer at the time the force was applied, rather than the 20/20 vision of hindsight. So it's something that we all do. If I watch a video of use of force, I watch the video and I have to control the rush to judgment. I have to control it. Like, I watch this thing through, and then I make a decision on whether that was justified or not. We all do this. As a professional, I'm trying to step back and say, okay, what did the officer know at the time? What information did the officer have? What information was the officer using to decide whether to use force or not? Once I watch the end of a video and I know how it ends, it's easy for me to say, yeah, you should have done this, you should have done that. The other case that we use, another main police use force case, is Tennessee versus Garner. This is often referred to as the fleeing felon law. So this law says when a law enforcement officer is pursuing a fleeing suspect, the officer may not use deadly force to prevent escape unless the officer has probable cause to believe that the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. So prior to 1985, when this was decided by the Supreme Court, police officers were allowed to shoot people for breaking in houses. Like, literally, that's what the case was based on. A juvenile burglary suspect who ran from the police officer decided he was going to get away, shot him in the back of the head as he tried to climb a fence. So now, again, taking into consideration Berkeley PD's track record of not being involved in a shooting since 2012, we come into contact with armed people all the time. We come into contact with armed robbery suspects all the time. But when they run from us, we don't shoot them. Right? We have to be able to articulate that that person will probably injure or kill somebody if we don't use force. The California state case law that defines use of force is PC, Penal Code 835A. That basically says if any peace officer has reasonable cause to believe that the person to be arrested has committed a public offense may use reasonable force to effect the arrest, to prevent escape, or to overcome resistance. So that case law, the state case law and the federal case law, closely overlap. Then we get down to our local police department case law, or policy, U2, which you're all familiar with. If you look at U2, U2 takes language directly from Graham versus Garner in the first part, and then directly from Tennessee versus Garner. And if you looked at 100 police department policies on use of force, you're going to see some of the very same words, and if the policy is written correctly, it should come directly from the Supreme Court case law. And there should be aspects of Graham versus Garner and Tennessee versus Garner. We're talking about a concept, one of the basics going on in the country right now, is this idea of warrior versus guardian. Should police officers have a mentality of being a warrior? Should police officers be guardians? Should we be, there are some people who would argue that, let's take away their equipment, take away their guns, we need more people out in the community doing outreach. We want people who are more of a social worker model than what some people consider militarized police. So what's the reality? The reality is, pretty much all the time, we are in guardian mode. All day, we are talking to people, we're taking reports, we're directing traffic, we're going to accidents. Most of what we do is pretty boring. But then there are times when we have to deal with people who are extremely dangerous. We have to deal with people who have shot people, who have just murdered people, we want to arrest people who will not willingly go with the police. And in those times, you need a police officer who can function, who can perform under stress, and who is willing to go and face that danger. So, I understand the arguments on both sides. I joke with my friends, if you read the reports that I wrote when I was at Howard, I sounded like a cop watcher. If I pulled those out, you're like, man, who wrote this? Yeah, I can make all those arguments. And there are parts of me that, believe those positions and say, you know what? Police have to do better. These things need to change. And then as a professional, there are times where I'm training police officers, I'm going in myself, putting myself in harm's way. My job is to lead police officers in dangerous situations. These people have kids and families. There are times where they need to be prepared to face that danger. So when we talk about training, how do we train police officers to do the things that we expect them to do? So here's just random pictures of things that officers do. All right, so we have range training. This is a picture of the de-escalation scenario training. This is active shooter training, so police officers protecting paramedics, carrying injured people. That's something that the community expects us to be able to do now. Defensive tactics. So a person who is attacking a police officer, maybe trying to disarm the officer, if the officer is proficient in defensive tactics, they may not have to resort to deadly force. This is an example of tactical training, learning how to ram the door, driver's training, and then all the other things that we need to know. So crisis intervention team, mental health, procedural justice, implicit bias. Now, how do we balance training? How do we figure out how many hours we should spend on different things? I'll tell you that a lot of physical skills, these are perishable skills. Learning to shoot a firearm, learning to defend yourself, learning to drive, those are things that take a lot of time, take a lot of training time. We also need to spend time on CIT, implicit bias, racial profiling. We need to have those trainings. It is very difficult to manage the amount of training that we need for each individual police officer and the limited amount of training time we have. It is difficult. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you a video. Keep in mind some of the things we talked about. Police use of force case law, the training that officers get, warrior versus guardian mentality. This is an incident that just happened recently in Los Angeles, involving LAPD. You're going to see officers respond to a call, they'll give it a dispatch tape, and you'll see their response to the incident as it unfolds.
It's a a Lutheran church? Is the person who is stabbing children? Yes, he is. Is it a man or what? Is he black or It's Hispanic man. What color shirt does he have on? He has a maroon shirt with green army shorts.
There's 16 on the west side of the church. He looks like he's going to have something in his hand. I have you to run out. So we're going to think about it now.
So what you see there is the officer's responding. They see the person is described. He's brandishing a knife, has a chair, a folding chair in his hand. People start to clear the area, but this woman, it's hard to see in this with this lighting, but there's a woman standing next to the wall, and she just stands right there. She stays there the whole time. The officers do everything that we would hope they do. They keep their distance. They don't approach him. They get a less lethal weapon up. This person is clearly brandishing the knife. He's got a chair, and he starts to approach the officers. The officers decide to use a less lethal weapon. It's ineffective because the suspect is blocking the rounds with the chair. The suspect's response to that is then to walk over to the woman, put the knife to her throat, and what you can't see on the video is he is basically sawing at her neck. Now, the officers are doing an impromptu hostage rescue, right? So there's a woman who's uninvolved, and now they have to do something to save this woman's life. Now, their tactical performance, what ended up happening is they killed her and they killed him. Okay? So when we get back to case law, what we expect of officers, the kind of training we give them, there's a gap here, right? So my point with this video is to say, the first thing I would want to know if I was evaluating this use of force is what kind of training did the officers have? They may have had all the CIT training in the world. They may have had less lethal training. Clearly, they had a less lethal weapon. But when it turns into a hostage rescue, there's no more time for de-escalation. They have to take immediate action. And when they did that, the performance wasn't what it should be. I don't know. I think it's just the.
It's just the people here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I would expect from officers who have had training on how to manage that. That is generally something that you expect SWAT teams to do, right? SWAT teams are trained to rescue hostages. SWAT team members in that situation on patrol would have looked at that. The officer whose body camera we're looking at was the only person who had a shot. His shot should have been to the head, because the suspect is holding the woman with a knife to her throat. And the officer's cadence should be slow, precision fire. Not a bunch of officers shooting back. So again, training. I understand that people don't want officers to have certain training because they believe that it leads to violence, but you don't get to pick and choose which officer responds to that. And something like that can unfold. So the point there is, yes, we need CIT training, we need de-escalation training, but the officers have to have some tactical training and know how to perform in hybrid situations.
A question about It's not clear to me if you're suggesting that he should have done otherwise, he should have done something different. What are you
What
saying?
I'm suggesting is that the other officers who did not have a clear shot should not have fired.
Oh, I didn't understand that they did.
They did.
A
Three
bunch
officers.
of people fired.
And my other
And
point
that's why the
is,
woman was killed?
yes,
Oh.
the officers killed her.
I
The officers
understood
shot
that,
her.
but I thought it was the guy we saw firing.
No, there's other officers, two other officers on the side, on the right side who were also shooting. Yes.
So, are you suggesting that, were there de-escalation tactics used here?
Sure. Some of the things we talked about. So, officers kept their distance.
I mean,
So-
distance is one, yeah.
Yeah. Officers kept their distance, they stayed behind cover. They stayed behind their cars. They got a less lethal weapon instead of just shooting the guy. Now, when people say, look at the end result, there are some people who say, well, they should have shot him before he got to the woman. That was their mistake. They should have shot him earlier, right? Now, if they showed up to the scene and challenged him and said, drop the knife, and then he started to move away and he didn't comply and he shot, there'd be people who say, well, why didn't you try to de-escalate? Right? It's a tough situation.
Well, I guess, you know, this is really educational, because I think I have a totally different understanding of the de-escalation. Because if you're dealing with somebody with a mental health disability, possibly schizophrenic, like what is unknown here, I can't really tell why that person had it. And so what I noticed is that the first thing that the officer did was begin shouting, drop the knife. So people sometimes with mental health disabilities get escalated by shouting. So I'm curious how, I guess why, so that for me, that's the disconnect. I don't know what was in the officer's mind in terms of why that person had a knife and what their intention was. And maybe, I don't know your training, I don't know if you're trained to even try to assess that. But in my world, which is more of a social services, mental health background, would be about making sure that bystanders were safely out of the way, and then trying to, through the positioning and through the body language and through verbals, trying to actually begin a conversation with that person.
Yeah,
Can I add something to that question? Did it make a difference, because I've been in use of force training into police departments already, does it make a difference that the police officer walks into an environment, there's somebody with a knife to their hand, and there's a different interaction? Or the different factor here is the fact that the communication through to the police officer was that somebody had already been injured. So this person who already injured and attacked somebody, we don't know what condition the other person is. He could be dying and bleeding on the ground. And because that is part of the factors the police officer is responding to, he wasn't going to de-escalate by finding someone with a knife sitting in the corner, having a conversation about, hey buddy, what are you doing? I need you to put that knife down. They were reacting to an already act of violence. Is that a factor?
Yeah, and that's the main factor is why are they there? What information do the officers have? Fortunately, in this video, you get the audio from the dispatch. So the person has already stabbed somebody, so he's arrestable for assault with a deadly weapon. If the officers think about the fleeing felon, you have a person who you have probable cause to believe poses a significant threat of death or serious bodily injury to some other person. In this case, he did. He's already stabbed somebody, and we don't know what he's going to do. The officers, if he starts to move away after the challenge, could be legally justified in shooting him based on Tennessee versus Garner. But because they're not trying to shoot him, he finds a victim, right? He finds somebody else, and now the situation has changed. So I agree with you that in a situation where a person is suicidal and isolated, you may try to establish rapport, start talking to them, and trying to calm the situation. In a situation where there's people everywhere, and this person has just stabbed somebody and is now facing off with the police brandishing a weapon, there is a heightened response. But yes, I agree that when we can, we should be trying to talk to that person back. I'm sorry, man.
I just have one more sort of paradigmatic comment or question. Some people talk about Tennessee versus Garner or other cases which establish what's legally justifiable. To me, that's the outer edges of what's permissible in court. It doesn't address what best practices is, or what, from a policy standpoint, what it should be. And so, like I said, it addresses essentially what's not illegal. And so, I guess, just that as a comment, to me, it's more interesting to focus on what's seen as the best de-escalation practices, as opposed to what's legally justifiable and what's not.
But the officers have to understand what's legally justifiable. We're asking them to manage something that is extremely chaotic. It goes from something static to something, an impromptu hostage rescue. My whole point of bringing up the case law is, if the officer looked at him approaching that woman and shot him.
But the de-escalation to me seems to suggest the whole reason we're talking about de-escalation is to create a best practices, as opposed to the outer bounds of what's illegal. I mean, it's not the most significant point in the world, but I'm just, in terms of the concept, I mean, clearly you have to know what the outer bounds of what's permissible by the Supreme Court for potential action is. Because if you don't, you could be arrested. I mean, a police officer could be arrested, or disciplined, or any numbers of sanctions. But then the question is, with respect to de-escalation, to me that's a search for what's the best practices within the realm of things that are legally permissible.
Right.
And that's the question now. The question now is some police departments are defining uses of force as a means of as part of the de-escalation process. So the argument from the oversight perspective is any use of force that you're using this kind of use of force instead of another use of force. Is that part of the escalation process? We say no. Police officers, some agencies are saying that even a minimal use of force, which is not deadly, is part of the process of de-escalation, which this in particular, when they use the beanbag, they're using it as a de-escalation process, even though we see it as a use of force.
Yeah,
so that's the question.
And that's the point of the definition, starting with the definition, to say de-escalation applies when the officers don't have to take immediate action to protect themselves or other people from death or serious bodily injury. That's when you de-escalate. If we just say, in our minds, de-escalation means don't use force, don't engage, then that would look very different. The officers get out of the car and they go, hey buddy, put the knife down, and he goes and he starts cutting the lady, cutting her neck. And the officers just stand there. They don't use force. They don't.
To me, it all arises from not necessarily the concept of what's legally justifiable, but from the concept that you pointed to as the sanctity of life. And that if that's the driving force, the sanctity of life, even if you look at the various priorities set up there, the victim's life and hostages, to innocent bystanders, to the police, then it's a means of trying to uphold that sort of priority, or that principle of sanctity of life. And in this situation, I mean, there was obviously, at some point, there was a woman her life was being threatened, and so that sanctity was being respected, or I don't know the right word. But, then the question becomes, I was interested, is there something else, and I have no idea what's appropriate enough, that could have been done to respect potentially the sanctity of the suspect's life, and even potentially the lady's life, whether that be, when someone first shows up, trying to clear the entire area of potential people who could potentially be harmed. Now, I understand what Commissioner Perez-Velez is saying is there's another issue already out there. This person's already attacked someone, as far as you know. But to me, at least, those are the questions that I'm asking in my mind, is what are the best practices to support this notion of the sanctity of life of all lives.
Yeah. And I agree with you, and that's why I tell you the principles we're establishing best practice. The best practice would be make all these other people go away. And now we're dealing with one person who's isolated. Yes. Is that practical in this scenario? Is it practical for the officers as they're approaching from one alleyway to effectively tell all those people and get them to move? I don't know why that woman
stayed. Is that a training principle to clear the area?
Oh, absolutely. But is it practical? Now, I don't know why the woman stayed against the wall when everybody else left. I don't know. But she,
literally paralyzed with fear.
okay,
But-
well,
And
that
nobody
is
spoke
something.
to her. Nobody said, ma'am, you need to
Exactly.
leave, you need to go.
The thing that's strange,
Clearing that area.
strange to me is the fact that with the focus on drop the knife, a lot of time went by. And nobody said, move away from there,
Yeah,
lady.
nobody
I
talks
mean, I would have thought that would be the number one thing.
Right.
In terms of what can we learn from that video, or in terms of de-escalation and saving life,
Yeah.
I would think the number
People
one thing
do
to
get
learn
paralyzed
is,
with fear.
because as you said, she
Look,
is
wait.
basically the only person in his range. Just get her out of there.
That's easy to say.
But nobody said to her, move.
I understand what you're saying. Let's just say, for argument's sake, no matter what you say, she's not going to move. Just like no matter what you say,
Oh,
he's not going to drop.
We don't know, because she
I know.
wasn't, you know.
I understand. But these are things. When we watch a video, we have 20/20 hindsight now, right? We all know how it ends. So we can tell you exactly what they should have done. The officers, as they're responding, are reacting to things that are
Yeah.
playing out in real time.
I'm just saying, in terms of what can we learn from that video, it seems like a prime example of clear the area.
And realistically, if I might add in, how many times have you seen a scene with officers on scene and people are standing around regardless of officers telling them to back away?
No, I'm just saying,
Realistically, it just doesn't happen.
in this particular
I
case,
know
it's
that we're
obvious,
talking
because she's
about-
the only person standing there.
No, and I get that, but I'm just saying, most times when we show up,
Oh, yeah.
cell phones are out, everybody's watching, and we can tell people to back up as much as we want. The reality of it, people don't leave because they want to either capture something on camera or they want to see how it ends or what
See,
happens.
but that's a
That's not what
catch-22.
was happening here.
Yeah, that's a
Clearly,
catch-22
That's not what was
here.
happening here. And so I just wanted just to recalibrate a little bit. I think what we're searching for is that, I'm trying to understand, is that considered, I hope that's not considered a success.
No, I showed this to show you.
So what we're trying to input, I think maybe together we're trying to brainstorm was there another approach? And I guess the question I have for you guys, who are the clinicians, who is informing your practice? Who are the mental health professionals who are giving you guidance while the police department has to become a substitute for mental health providers?
Well,
Clearly there's something
you made-
deranged here.
Okay, but you made an assumption. You don't know his mental state at all. You don't know. You have not assessed him. So to say that if we just put Berkeley mental health in that, we could diffuse that. It's
That's not what I said.
Okay, but
That's not what I said.
But you're interjecting mental health and suggesting that a mental health clinician would change the outcome.
I asked you a different question. Because what the situation we find ourselves in Berkeley is that Berkeley Police Department is responding to a lot of mental health calls. So my question to you, because you can evaluate from a distance, you can see if somebody, there are signs of schizophrenia, there are signs of where you can make some inferences. You may not be right, but you can narrow. And you could have, for example, a few weeks ago, I had a friend of mine called in. She says, there's a woman who's screaming. By herself, she's just screaming, and I don't know if she's high on drugs or if she's schizophrenic or what her problem is. She's just going off. She goes, should I call the police? I said, well, let me come down and see. And in actual fact, she was schizophrenic. And in actual fact, even though she sounds super scary, I said, ma'am, are you okay? She goes, oh, yeah, no, I'm okay. And she came out of that delusion. Now, she was not okay. I mean, she's definitely suffering. But she wasn't violent. But I think the perception of people is that, oh my gosh. And all I'm asking you is that, doesn't it seem reasonable that if you are going to be responding to mental health calls, that your practice would be informed by people who have spent not 40 hours, but thousands of hours?
I understand your point. Does that have anything to do with this review?
Let's let go of that.
So, all right. So to answer your question, like I said before, we are on the forefront of working with clinicians in the field.
So who are you working with?
You know we work with Berkeley Mobile Crisis. You know, I don't understand what your question is.
I'm asking, who is teaching you? Who are the mental health professionals? Are you become, like, how do we if you're being expected to go into the field and to encounter people with mental health crises, I'm asking, who's teaching you?
There's a whole established program, as you know, a crisis intervention team, right? It is integrated between clinicians and practitioners, police practitioners. You know about the program.
I'm well aware. I've watched
Okay.
it many times on the
Okay.
street, and they seem to not, they're not the ones that, in my observation, I haven't seen them be the ones who are controlling the scene. They tend to be, it tends to be a police officer who is directing operations.
Did you understand? I'm a CIT officer or some of these officers.
I'm just telling you what I've observed.
I know, CIT is for police officers. You understand? Sworn police officers who are
40-hour
CIT.
training or an 8-hour training,
Exactly.
depending.
So that is what we're doing to try to bridge the gap, to try to provide more training. We're not going to have PhD level clinicians who are working as police officers who are managing these crises and then trying to de-escalate with the best mental health practices while also being highly trained in police use of force. I wish we could do that, but it's just, that's not where we're at. That's where we're not where we are.
And I would just say, even on that last example, I saw all the things you were talking about that, are used to de-escalate a situation, whether it's trying to give directions, whether it's sitting, behind cover and keeping distance. I saw all these things. The only thing that interests me is, are there lessons learned after the fact, given that I think everyone would agree that that's not the outcome that we would ideally want. Understanding that doesn't mean that the police in that situation did something against policy or did something wrong. But just given that circumstance, if you had to face it again, what else would you try?
The main points of this video are, to me, they respond to a person who is already acting violently and is armed with a weapon. They contact that person, he's still armed with a weapon, he's still posing a threat. They try to keep their distance to talk to him, they attempt to use a less lethal weapon. He escalates the situation by trying to kill a bystander. And now the officers, using the priorities of life, the hostage, she is the most important person at that church right now. Their actions should now transition from, let's talk to this guy and get him to the hospital or get him in custody, to we need to use deadly force to stop him from killing her. Now the performance for when I'm training police officers, the transition and their identification that that was the new priority is correct.
Yeah.
Their performance was not.
I guess the question I'm asking is slightly different. I think everyone would agree that if someone has a knife to someone's neck and is starting to cut someone, which is the scenario that you described, obviously an officer is going to have to shoot. I'm just curious, are there any techniques that could have been used to keep these, in your view, and maybe not, but might have been employed to try to keep this particular event, or this escalating to the point of him approaching and attempting to kill someone?
The ACLU did a
That's
review.
fine.
The ACLU did a review of this particular case, and one of their arguments was, and this is a very well-known example of how can you evaluate it? The ACLU had an argument that perhaps because there were so many people in the group around the possible assailant with a knife and a chair, that he was not presenting at the time a credible danger to everybody around. Whether another implications of CIT and medical health could have been used in order to defuse the situation. That was contradicted by the fact that the person would not release the weapon and continue to move towards the police officers, even as they were asking him to drop the weapon. Then the ACLU said, the reason why the woman is against the wall is because you're pointing guns in the direction in which she's standing, so she's petrified that if she moves, she's going to get shot. But I think that the whole argument is that everything was predicated on the original reporting that this person had injured somebody else. This person was seen with a weapon. So at the moment, the police officer going into this kind of a situation maybe went in with the mentality of, we need to continue to stop this person from creating more harm, instead of having the de-escalation process mind plan saying, is there anything else that we can do, instead of just drawing our weapons and saying the person to drop the knife, because that could escalate it. The argument always is, hindsight is 20/20. At that time, it's a little more difficult to do.
I agree with
But the
that.
point still exists that there were other things that could have been evaluated at that point that could have created a much different
We're gonna,
result.
I would just say two things just real quickly, just because I understand, I have no doubt that this is a legally justified shooting. So I think, to me, that the ACLU arguments about whether it's legally justified or not. But to me, the real issue, and these things are in hindsight all the time, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn from past instances. Are there practices or, that can be applied to future circumstances? And like learn from the lessons of the past. And so that's just my only question is there anything in this that you saw that the officers didn't do? Not in question or legal justification, because I think they were legally justified, but is there anything additionally that you think that you, in your training, you would train BPD officers to do differently, to hopefully come out with a different outcome, or no, this sort of, they did everything they could to de-escalate?
No, I mean, I think that you're exactly right. If we can remove everybody who's uninvolved from the area, absolutely, we want to avoid that. That's a nightmare. Honestly, for the officers, I couldn't even imagine being in that situation. They're trying to manage this, and then all of a sudden he attacks an innocent person. Okay, we want to avoid that at all costs. Now, there are times, like Sergeant Cummings said, where people won't move or they just want to be part of the contact, and it's just not going to happen. We're going to move through a bunch of, I'm going to show some other videos, and if we spend an hour on each video.
And you see how complicated things can get after you watch the entire video. Imagine being officers on scene, arriving and having to make a decision like that. See, we can Monday morning quarterback this all day after watching the video and talking about it, but the officers who arrive on scene have to make a split-second decision and be right 100% of the time.
But we all, I just really want to kind of emphasize. I don't want to belittle the practice of Monday morning quarterbacking, because evaluating what has happened is how we make sure we do better next time.
I agree 100%.
So I'd rather not belittle this practice. I think it's important.
Now, this is
Moving on.
Yeah, this slide. I'm gonna show you some other ones that we can have. We can have them on
We'll keep at it.
Why don't we have the comments at the end and let you show us? Because I think
That's not as much fun.
Yeah, I think I would actually prefer that this is where I can ask me at the time, because you will forget.
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought
So one of the
2 questions left over from that one. I'll bring them up later.
Okay. So one of the questions that comes up in the practice of de-escalation, you'll hear police executives and politicians sometimes say, time is always on our side. We always have time. There's always time to de-escalate. And as a person who's been involved in hundreds of critical incidents, I'll tell you, time is not always on your side. So good uses of time, waiting for additional resources. If you can slow things down, get more officers on scene, get less lethal on scene, those type of things, that's a good use of time. Negotiation, obviously, is a great use of time. We should be talking to this person, trying to come to a peaceful resolution. Staging medical, getting the ambulance to be on scene so that if we get into a confrontation, we have the professionals on scene to manage medical care. That's a good use of time. Developing a deliberate plan. So when you arrive to a scene, if you have time, you should come up with a hasty plan or an emergency plan. And if you have time, you should come up with a deliberate plan. Like, this thing is going on for sometimes hours. But what is our plan if we have to try to physically control this person? Okay? Those are good uses of time. I want you to think of all the things we've talked about and say, evaluate, is there time to de-escalate? This is a video of an incident that happened in San Diego. What you're looking at is a helicopter forward-looking infrared system, FLIR. And what you're gonna see, you'll hear some of the dispatch, but basically what happens is a man goes to look for his estranged wife. He goes to the family's house. This is her family's house. He ends up shooting several people, including her father and her mother, in front of this scene. So right here, this is where it all occurred. He grabs his estranged wife and he pulls her into a vehicle and he's holding her hostage. The officers are going to be getting information as they respond, and then you'll see how it unfolds.
It's all or nothing.
It's all or nothing.
Can you turn the volume up a little bit?
Vehicle in Camaro.
Alright, so I'll start.
Better.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Infrared. I can see the dead people on the floor.
Nothing.
Wonderful. Come, Miss Lisa, you can see it.
Is there a way of doing it halfway or not?
Nope.
Just the back?
Like some. Whew. I think the other way was better.
But we can put it off, watch it, and then you can come and we can put the light on again.
Alright.
Turn it up.
Yeah.
Better.
Yeah, better off.
Come see it, Miss Lee, and we can turn it back on.
Alright, so again, watch right here in the middle of the street. You'll see the suspect with his wife. He's been near a car right in the middle of the street.
Hey, we're still going to A7. It looks like it's going to be street side on Marlboro.
We're getting information that it's pulled into a vehicle in Camaro.
Okay, we're going to A7. He's still struggling with her out in the street. So there's the middle of the street.
Pointing the gun to her head and pulling the trigger. That's what the officer's reported.
Okay, so officers are going to A7. Looks like he's got a gun. Okay, shots fired. Suspect's down. Let's start medics and let's start get additional units here at 97.
Units to check on right computer. Position. 891 units down.
Alright. So,
Again.
similar situation, okay? Again, the officers should try to de-escalate when they don't have to take immediate action. If you respond to a scene where a suspect has just shot multiple people, grabs his wife hostage, puts her in a car, he sees you, he grabs her, he's holding her, and he's pulling the trigger for her. If that's your family member, what do you want the officers to do? Okay? That's what it comes down to. Do the officers need to take immediate action? And in this case, this is an officer who happens to be a San Diego PD SWAT officer. And you see the difference in his performance versus the last video. He doesn't spray a lot of bullets. He triangulates, one shot to the head, saves the hostage. Okay? That's training. When I talk about training, that's what it is. Performance under stress. Triangulating means if you see the person, and there's two of us, we want to separate so that we have an angle. Right? We don't want to be in line facing the same person. We want to separate. We want to triangulate.
So if Spencer's talking to you, I'm standing here. So if we have to take action, he can take action, I can take action from this direction.
So, I don't understand, was there some de-escalation
No.
expressed?
My question is, was there time to de-escalate?
Oh, all right.
Was there time? No. The officers need to take immediate action. Okay? There's another video.
Allison Christine, right now, a vigil is being held for Sahid Vassal, right at the corner behind me. It's where he was gunned down by police yesterday afternoon. Some people who live in this neighborhood say Vassal was very well known and was harmless. But police have released surveillance video that could have many people thinking otherwise. Police released a series of surveillance video from Crown Heights businesses showing Sahid Vassal parading down Utica Avenue holding a silver object in his hand. He makes threatening motions as if aiming a gun at people he's passing by. This video shows an adult walking with a small child, clearly startled by Vassal pointing what looked like a gun at them. It turned out to be this metal pipe. Several witnesses called 911.
What we know so far, very preliminarily, multiple reports of a man with a gun aiming a gun at citizens. That is not a garden variety situation. If that's what officers are responding to in real time, we've got to recognize if they believe they were doing an immediate matter of life and death to the people in the surrounding area, that's an exceedingly difficult, tense, split-second decision that has to be made.
Police say the responding officers were from a strategic response group and an anti-crime unit, not from the local 71st precinct, and not familiar with Vassal, who was a popular fixture in the community. Police released this surveillance video of the moment Vassal took a shooting stance, pointing the pipe at police on the corner of Utica and Montgomery. 4 officers fired 10 shots, hitting Vassal multiple times. This photo shows the officers surrounding him after he went down. Vassal's family says he was bipolar and not violent. They question the police use of force.
To just come and shoot someone because we see something that looked like a gun, I think that's not how police should be trained.
If the police saw him with something into his hand, tell him drop it, hold your hand up. They did not.
This was not an EDP call. This was not an emotionally disturbed call. This was a call of a man pointing what 911 calls and people felt was a gun at people on the street.
This afternoon,
Yes. Like.
So, I think we all agree that the end result, you know the whole story, is that we have a person who should be in the hospital, right? This person should be getting treatment. But now they're on the street. To my earlier point, how do we minimize the number of contacts we have between people in crisis and police officers? Because when we have a person in crisis acting violently, these are objective people, right? These are victims and witnesses who are reporting that this person is pointing a gun at them. The officers didn't provide that information. The officers are responding to calls to 911 from multiple people who believe that this person is armed with a gun and is pointing it at people.
How would you talked about awareness of suicide by a cop. Do you think that plays into this scenario? Not this particular, just the scenario.
It could be. Later on, normally what happens is that once we do an investigation, we maybe find out this person had suicide ideation, this person fantasized about suicide, they believe they wanted the police to kill him. I don't know. I don't know if that was his ultimate goal.
I guess I'm asking this, is if we could truncate this video to stop, you know, I mean, we didn't see him get shot, so if we didn't know that he got shot, or we didn't know what the police did, and we just saw this video, what would you recommend be, you know, in your de-escalation training be the ideal response of a police officer?
Well, if the suspect, it all depends on the threat. If the suspect is walking down the street and has a knife.
Yeah, just based on what you heard in this scenario.
Based on, I would have shot him. There's no question.
Any de-escalation techniques that you would utilize?
If I had credible information from multiple witnesses that a person is armed with a gun pointing it at people, and then I see the person who's described, and he takes what is anybody would recognize as a shooting stance, and I see that in his hand, then I'm going to defend myself. The officers responded the way that I would think any human being would to preserve their own lives.
Are there any techniques that you would recommend that an officer could take in that situation in your training to BPD? I mean, I know you talked about taking covers, keeping distance. Do any of those things, you know, do they apply here? Or I mean, I definitely
in hindsight, I'd say that
in hindsight,
we all agreed that he is a person that needed help.
Yeah.
But based on his actions and based on what the officers perceived, they were absolutely justified in shooting him. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I've heard where they sent police from a different area, and I think had it been the police from his neighborhood, who obviously knew that he was mentally disturbed, I think the outcome would have probably been different because they would have known. And that's why I'm a person that believes in community policing, because you need to know who's in your community. And, you know, there's a lot of people walking around in the community that have mental issues, and you would have known that. And you wouldn't have, and these people were outside, I mean, they were outside policemen. They didn't know them.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about NYPD, we're talking about 30,000 police officers. It would be difficult for even in Berkeley PD, as small as we are, to guarantee that the officer responding to any given call and know the person. It's pretty difficult. And then if that person still takes the same actions, I can't say the officer's just going to go, hey, I really hope that's not a gun. I really hope I'm going to wait for you to shoot at me before I decide to use deadly force.
Would you think that an officer is failing to do his job in this scenario and not shoot that individual?
I would have some serious training concerns if that officer worked for me. If that officer saw that, because there's nothing to tell us that gun was fake or that item was not a gun, right? So if the officer decided, I'm gonna roll the dice and hope that that's not a gun, that person probably shouldn't be a police officer.
And also, I think we're getting, while it's very important to recognize people with mental illnesses and what they're acting out because of that mental illness, I also think you have to put it in perspective too. Just because you're mentally ill does not mean you can harm other people. And so it's balancing the fact that someone may be able to be treated versus you're on a busy New York downtown street with a man who you truly believe has a weapon and may intend to use it. And so how do you find that balance, right?
This scenario itself seems to, you see, I'm not contesting it anymore. It's really just a question. I'm just trying to understand. It's really a binary situation. It's just, you should have shot, and if you didn't, then that was problematic by itself.
So just a little separate from the video, but just in general, what's the criteria for sending a mental health professional to a call? Because it kind of seems like most of these calls, like the person is most likely mentally ill, but there's also that like danger in the situation. So how do you think distinguish?
You kind of hear the governor and also the police commissioner talk about it. They weren't responding to a mental health call or emotionally disturbed person call, as they call it. So when we get calls, there's a person running naked on University and Shaddy. Right, okay. This person clearly needs help. We automatically dispatch mental health clinicians or CIT officers. When we hear things, we do this all day. So when we hear certain things, we say, okay, this does not sound like a criminal matter. It sounds like a person who needs to go to the hospital. Let's bring the right people there and let's use the right tactics to get this person to the hospital. Right? We start with the goal. What's the goal? Make sure this person does not injure themselves or another person to get that person to the hospital.
But so if a man's walking down the street pointing a gun at people, that you don't automatically think that that's a mental illness.
It really depends. If we don't have any information that tells us that this person is holding something that is not a real gun, they're talking to things that aren't there. There's no other information. They're basically responding to a person walking and threatening people with a gun. That's the only information they have.
Post time not on your side in that situation.
And it's not like
Johnny English shot the president.
So hypothetically, if the person was reported as being mentally ill with a gun, no mental health clinician or professional is going to approach that person until they can be on.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can put them there, but they're not going to talk to them until that gun is out.
Berkeley mental health.
They're not going to come. We can call them. Is he armed still? Tell me when he's not armed.
Yes.
So this is following up on something Commissioner Ramsey said about the previous video. And it's something I'm curious about. You say that Berkeley Police Department has not had a shooting for 6 years. I assume this is considered low for even a city of 120,000 people. It's a, right?
I'd say if you ask somebody, if you had a city that borders Oakland,
right. Okay,
would they be more active?
So it's a low, so there is a very few. So this gets to the point of best practices as compared to simply what's legally justifiable. It seems like the BPD must be doing something a little differently from some other places that have higher shooting rates. And I think you must be putting in some de-escalation principles that maybe even go beyond what you said here, because mostly here it's about taking cover but I'm wondering, for example, on that first video you showed us, when the guy, policeman is yelling, "Put down the knife," in a very sort of aggressive tone of voice. I'm wondering if there'd be a way of de-escalating. Because to me, de-escalation means trying not to escalate the situation, trying to de-escalate. That tone of voice, to me, is escalating. And I'm thinking that your department must be doing something along these kinds of lines that makes it different from fewer shootings. Or is it just that you have fewer such situations in Berkeley? I don't know.
I would just say that, again, we are not going to take credit for the outcomes, because next year we'll have 6 officer-involved shootings. What I will say is
You have a pattern of lower rates.
Right. We take a systematic approach to these calls. We have procedures that we believe in. We have officers that don't want to shoot people. Okay? So you start with a position of an officer. Officers get on scene. They're not there to use force. They don't want to get involved in shootings. They're not looking for that. Their approach is, how do we calm the situation down?
And so how do you?
And we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, this is one section.
It brings to mind, you've heard of this police officer in Canada, where it was at Toronto or Montreal or someplace, and the guy's there with a gun, and he's pointing at the officer. And the officer is back pretty far away, and the guy's saying, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me. He refuses to shoot. He says, put down the gun. But eventually the guy was like de-escalated, and they took him away. You know.
We do that all the time. Yeah.
You do?
We do.
Okay.
There's no way we could not shoot anybody in 6 years when we deal with people in crisis.
That's my point. That's my point. You must be using de-escalation practices that you haven't told us about yet. Okay?
I'm trying to get there. All right. I want you to pay attention.
Don't respond.
Again, we can't do 30 minutes on every video. So here we go. This is a video in Fairbanks, Alaska. What I want you to see, this is a suspect who has shots, rounds off in a building, and he's walking down the street with a gun in his hand, and the officer's going to contact him.
Drop it now! Drop the bag! 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 It has to be like this! 1033 traffic! Drop the bag! Drop it! Doesn't have to be like this. What's your name? Stop! What's your name, man?
Suspect?
What's your name? Drop the bag! You guys got it? Put this one down, man. Stop it constantly. It has to be like that. Doesn't have to be like
Policeman saying that.
Yes, yes. Doesn't have to be like that. Now put it down. Drop the gun. Drop. Stop it. It doesn't have to be like this. Drop the gun. Be like this, guys. Put it down if possible. Not the end of the world, all right? Drop the gun, man. Drop the gun. It doesn't have to be like this, man. Whatever happens, it's not the end of the world. Put it down. Don't do it.
They attempt to use a taser, he has a backpack on, so it doesn't work.
Drop the gun. Be like this. Drop it. Stop. Drop it now.
So now he walks over to a bus stop and he grabs a hostage.
Great.
Stop. Don't do it.
There's a police officer right here, shoots and kills the suspect. So the point of that section is just to say that, look, these officers clearly don't want to shoot the guy. He's already shot his gun. He's walking with a gun in his hand. They're attempting de-escalation. Their verbal de-escalation is better than some of the others we've seen. Hey, man, it doesn't have to be like this. What's your name? Something other than drop the gun, right? So they're trying to talk to him. He never says a word.
I think they waited too long. I mean, really?
Yeah. So this is
He could have turned around and shot them while it's still, I mean, that was a long walk.
They're walking. Yeah, they're walking out in the open
That's what I
for
mean.
several blocks
Yeah, that's,
with no cover.
yeah,
Right.
that wasn't, Looking at the de-escalation tactics, that was not a good one.
So if you only look at, if you say the end result, your only goal is, we want to make sure that the police don't hurt people, then that's what you get. You get officers who are trying to contact a person who's already shot his gun. He's holding the gun. He has the means to kill any of them right there. And they're trying to use a taser. And then what does he do? He finds a hostage, right? We can sit there and say, you know what, you got shot too soon, but then what happens when we wait too long? All right, so now I want you to think about the principles of using a less lethal weapon against a person who has a deadly weapon. This is the principle that would say, I do not teach this. I would not teach or tell officers to try to tase a person who has a gun, okay? And this is what happens. Watch this. You're going to see a SWAT team approach the door. They're going to serve a search warrant on a person who's wanted for stealing a gun. So there you have officers who attempt to use a taser against a person who arms himself with a firearm when the police show up. Okay, does that tell you his intent? Does that tell you where his head is? The police are at the door, I'm gonna grab my gun, stand in the doorway. They try not to use deadly force, so they try to use a taser. And in response, he shoots one of them, and they shoot and kill him. Now, if your only goal is to not have the police hurt people, not have the police use deadly force, this is what happens. This violates the priorities of life. This guy can kill any of those officers like that. And their response is to try to use the taser when he poses a deadly threat. Okay. So we talk about verbal de-escalation. Obviously, we train officers to go through, different procedures. These are some of the phrases we tell them to avoid. Let's kind of skip through this. Phrases to consider using.
Why? Can I ask just about the de-escalation thing? Is there a distinction? I know there has to be some distinction to make between the gun present versus a knife or some other weapon, a pipe or anything else seriously hurts. What's the distinction? What's the distinction you make for that, for de-escalation technique? Seems to me pretty clear. If someone has a gun and they're shot it off, they're pointing at other people, or search warrant, being arrested for having a gun and so forth. Not as you put it, time for de-escalation. But are there other scenarios where maybe there is more time as opposed to a gun?
Immediacy of danger?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about whatever weapon. I joke with the officers. Like, oh, the guy had a knife, he had a knife. It's like, unless he's a ninja, he's not going to throw the knife, just stay back, right? And so that's how I'll talk to officers when we're training. Keep your distance from the guy. Okay, so what? He has a butcher knife. Stay back. And we keep our distance, and then we manage it. But with a firearm, we literally can kill any of us right now. Yes.
So, bearing in mind that you said that there hasn't really been a shooting since 2005. And given all these mental health problems, I know that it's tempting to really focus on the shooting scenario. But I'm feeling like that doesn't necessarily, it's not as relevant to our situation here in Berkeley. For example, Kayla Moore died in police custody under the weight of 6 officers. Has that situation been evaluated by your officers?
I'm not gonna get into that discussion with you here.
Well, I feel like that's more relevant for those kind of situations
Look.
where it doesn't, just let me finish, where it doesn't involve somebody who's armed, but more day to day. What I'm observing are 5150 calls where people are being wrestled into restraints and having hoods put on their heads.
We're gonna talk about that.
Well, I'm just curious how long, I feel like that's.
This is a 2-hour block of training. The more that we go, I can't get through everything. And what happens? Berkeley, we'll skip through this. I'm sure you all understand the concepts.
I'll say it's been useful to me.
Thank you. We're going to talk about officer safety principles. Okay? The officers, again, should be using their words and not getting into physical confrontations if they can avoid it. Okay? This is a situation in Baltimore where we're going to look at 2 officers contacting a person who's wanted for domestic violence. I want you to see the officer's demeanor, the way they approach it, and the suspect's demeanor.
I'm just saying. All right, so what's the first thing you notice about the suspect? He's agitated.
He's agitated. What about him physically? No shirt on, right? So that's a clue. You know, you contact a guy, he's out there, he doesn't have a shirt on. He's mad, he doesn't have a shirt on. Guys in the street, they take off their shirts so you can't grab them. So that's the thing that guys do in the street. They're gonna get into a street fight, they'll take off their shirts. So it's already kind of escalated. Do you notice who the suspect is focused on? Which officer? The man.
No, he's focused on the African American police officer.
I just said the man, there was no other color there.
Yeah. But I think the point is that he's exchanging bad words with him because he's saying that the guy, the police officer, is a sellout because he's confronting him.
Were we supposed to understand what he was saying? I couldn't.
Oh, sorry. He was cursing at the officer.
Police.
So he's basically saying, keep your hands off me, F you, things like that. Okay? So the male officer never says a word. He's kind of like, I don't know what to do. Should I detain this person? Should I not? The female officer is clearly more in charge, has more an idea of what they need to do. If I told you that they had a legal reason to detain him in handcuffs as soon as this video started, how do you think they should have approached it? Now that you know this guy was willing to punch the officer in the face.
They should have detained him.
Physically detain him first?
No, they should have. If he was going to be placed under arrest, then that should have just started right off. I mean, casual conversation, you're under arrest, whatever, however you do it. But to let it go on, they both could have gotten injured. I mean, he knocked that guy down.
I can't help but think that I feel like the female officer escalated the situation. That if the guy's coming out, and I think you said he was a domestic violence, so he's already escalated. So if somebody said something like, calm down, like it's okay, I want to hear what you have to say. Why don't you go ahead and tell me your side? Let's talk about it. Okay, here's what I have to do as an officer. We're gonna have to do this. I'm not gonna hurt you. I mean, just some more calming. And a lot of times people get escalated when they don't understand the situation, or if he's already escalated. So when we talk about de-escalate, what's gonna bring him down and take it down from a physical situation? But I think her posture, the way she stood, I think it was pretty bad. She went and stood in front of the male officer like she's gonna take him on, or she's gonna, so I felt like she was very aggressive.
And that's a common...
And I think it ratchets up like this. I don't know that the guy with no shirt had an intention of getting into a fight with her. Maybe it's possible. I'm not saying disregarding, but it's a clue. But it's not necessarily so.
It's weird because I saw it differently. I do martial arts, and I saw it differently. I saw the suspect physically throwing his body at the male police officer. I mean, he was, for the failure to use another word, fronting physical strength to the other guy, and she got in the way and say, "That's enough. Stop it."
She was young.
No, she said, "Stop it." He's raising his voice. She's saying, "Stop it. That's enough. Stop it." I mean, so I don't know what I don't know.
It's not a de-escalation.
So when I talk to aggressive people who have concerns, I lower my voice in order for them to be able to listen to themselves, and they have to lower their voice in order to listen to me. But it seems to me that this gentleman is so high elevated, and he is actually escalating his own energy, that if you don't put some kind of a break here, it could have escalated into a physical confrontation with a male police officer. So I think that she just tried to de-escalate his aggressiveness against the male police officer by putting herself even in danger. So which to me, we might question whether that's a smart thing to do, but that to me is a way to de-escalate that interaction while putting herself to be a different focus for the police officer and not be the male one. So I mean, I see it like you see it, but that's not how it's playing out.
Yeah, and the issue here, when we show this to police officers, we're trying to get them to understand that the police officers know that you don't know how it's going to end. Okay, we don't know how willing the suspect is to punch us in the face. Okay, now in the end we find out, oh, like he's willing. He's willing.
I would have been concerned with his shirt off, that he's gonna, if he's already been accused of domestic violence, he had his shirt off. I'm thinking right away, if I'm a policeman, that he's probably he's still angry.
I'm not gonna wash my car with my shirt off anymore. Why was having his shirt off? I never really
It's just something over the street.
Baltimore, it's hot.
It's
Baltimore. I lived there.
So
in our house, I'll take care of this shirt.
In the house,
But on those slides I went by quickly about words to avoid and words to say, did I read it wrong? It said avoid saying for your safety and mine. There was a set of words that it said avoid saying.
I'll get all that to Kathy so you have the list.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So is it wrong to say calm down? Or?
People, I don't know if you have, if you ever tried to say that to your partner.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Some people don't like.
I'm going to need you to simmer down.
So it's not always a good idea. So we fill in there. It's like, does it work?
Listening is
But that whole list of things seem to all you counterintuitive, like for your safety and mine, or
Those are the things we want the officers to say.
Oh,
yes.
I misread it. All right.
Yeah. So
And this is responding to a call for domestic violence.
right. Yeah. So the main points there when we're training officers, there is a time to be deliberate and take action and control the situation by physically controlling the person, putting them in cuffs early on. Okay? If a person, you know you're going to arrest him anyway, and he's being aggressive, we don't want him to dictate the confrontation.
But she tried to do a control hold. Couple of times she tried to do a control hold, and it didn't work for her.
So their physical approach to this was ineffective. All right. Now I understand from your point of view. I know in your world you believe that we can talk everybody down. I don't know that anybody could have talked that guy down.
Well, let me just offer this. That my job used to be. I worked at a facility for severely developmentally disabled children and adults. My job was to be in a room and wait, and they would say, "We need coverage in room 6. Somebody's throwing this or this or that." I didn't have weapons. All I had was my voice. And sometimes we would go hands-on. But there's a lot you can do with your voice and with your body position and timing and so forth. So I guess I'm again, and I'm not trying to be rude. I'm actually really sincerely looking for, we're seeing some very dramatic situations here, and I appreciate the last one because I feel like it more accurately reflects the realities that Berkeley Police Department is dealing with. That's not necessarily shootouts and this kind of thing.
I hear what you're saying, but we deal with everything.
I'm not saying we don't. I'm not saying, but I'm saying on a percentage, the majority. Yeah. Unless I've really not put it in the papers or something. No. It feels like the majority is unarmed.
Yes.
And so that's, and I will say this also, I have seen some Berkeley police officers do a really good job. There was one situation where a guy was clearly having a psychotic break, and I was really impressed with the amount of space. There was about 4, sometimes, as you mentioned earlier, the number of officers in itself can be an escalation. And so some of the officers took sort of a backseat, some of the officers, a couple of officers, he was at a bus stop, so he was a little confined, but they gave him enough room through their verbal prompts. They were able to get what they needed. It was very skillful. I have also seen not so good ones. And so what I'm looking for here is what is BPD's official position? So how do I know how to hold officers accountable?
I can get there if we keep moving, but
we're getting there.
All right. So one of the questions, or one of the things that people have tried to do to influence American policing is to say, let's do what they do in the UK. Okay, in the UK they don't have guns in general. Let's take an approach that they use in the UK. This is a video that shows how that process has been working, and you'll see some officers in here from Richmond PD.
Policing in the US has reached a critical point. Last year, officers shot and killed around 1,000 civilians. In a string of scandals, many unmarked. With an estimated 300 million guns in America, those on the front line are in a difficult position.
The only thing that you know that's going to occur every day is you're going to come to work and you're going to put on a uniform, and that's it. You don't know if you're going to get shot. You don't know if you're going to have to shoot something or use force or take another individual's life.
Look at this, they're dealing with it. He's got a machete.
Chuck Wexler is a former hostage negotiator. He's seeing what American police can learn from British tactics when dealing with violent suspects armed with sharp weapons.
They are back. Look at the distance. Look how close they are. And he's coming at them with a machete. Look how many. They must be 20.
Determined to cut the use of deadly force, he's come to Scotland with 25 of America's most senior police chiefs. They spent 4 days watching how to deal with confrontations without drawing the gun. The demonstrations have impressed the Americans.
Nobody's going to die from learning de-escalation techniques. There's a whole host of things that we picked up here where we can start, and it starts in the right direction.
Back in the States, some of the Scottish techniques are being tried out. Police come up against a man threatening neighbours with a hatchet. Rather than potentially firing their weapons, they withdraw. Some are sceptical.
It's not even the fact that if he hurts the neighbors, what if he goes crazy and goes outside and hurts someone else? Even if he just hurts him, let him kill him, and still like, police did a good job and left.
In turns, hundreds of American police forces are now experimenting with British policing tactics as the country grapples with its response to violent situations. Jonathan Samuels, Sky News.
You can hold on, we're going to go right to another video. So this is a video of an actual incident, body-worn camera in the UK.
We were deployed to what came into the control room as a grade 2 domestic incident. It wasn't blue lights and sirens, it was a slow time response. We were sent to an address that was a report of a domestic incident going on where the male party was attempting to force entry to his ex-partner's house where her and her children were.
As they arrived, I got a call from her saying he's outside the address now. I updated them, so they ran round to the address.
As we approached the front door to the address, he's produced an 8-inch carving knife that he had concealed inside of his trousers.
Watch out. Put down now. Put down the knife. Spray! Put it down! Put it down! Come on! Put it down! Put it down!
At that moment, Alex's colleague shouted across the airwave, "Knife!"
Put down the knife!
Alex pressed his red button on his airwave, also known as 10-0 button.
Put it down! Put it down! Put it down! Put it down! Get on the floor! Get on the floor!
Which meant it pinpointed in on the map exactly where he was. Within 63 seconds, we had numerous police officers at the location, which meant the incident could be resolved, luckily without any injury.
It happened really, really quickly. The second he turned around with that knife, you don't have time to freak out, for want of a better description. You fall back on your training, because we're very big on scenario-based training. You fall back on the kit that you're given. We worked in conjunction with our mapping system, and it allowed my colleagues to get to me within 63 seconds, which was an absolute godsend because it seemed like an eternity despite the time frame that it actually did take for them to get there.
When I knew that Alex and his colleague were safe, that's the only point I was able to relax. And when we say it took 63 seconds for the officers to get there, the time it took to get the update to me because of what was going on, it was a little bit later.
All right, so when we look at UK versus US tactics, and I go to the UK and I work with colleagues over there, we have lively banter about policing procedures.
Banter.
And one of the things that I tell police officers in the US, look, our policing system is based on the UK, it comes from the UK, okay? They have a professional system. Police officers over there are not being killed and stabbed to death every day. So there has to be something to what they're doing, okay? What can we learn from what they're doing? The couple takeaways that I tell police officers is the UK tactics don't automatically transfer, okay? There are obviously cultural differences and differences in threat. So in a country of 300 million people, there are 300 million guns here. Yeah. It's just different, okay? You can't put London Met in the middle of Chicago and expect for them to manage that, okay? It's not gonna work. US has over 300 million privately owned guns. And there's suicide by cop. So police officers here have to be able to be aware of suicide by cop and learn how to manage it. If you want to die at the hands of a police officer in the UK who does not have a firearm, how do you make them kill you? Right? So there is no suicide by cop. It can't happen. They don't have a firearm generally. And you see how they manage a person with a knife. Access to weapons in a patrol vehicle. So some of our peers in the UK would say, well, our guys, if the guy's coming at them, the officers will run away. Let's see if that would work. Yeah, it might work, except that if the person gets into the car, there's guns in the car, right? So we can't just abandon our cars and run away. There are tactics we can use. We can lock the cars. We can use certain tactics to try to avoid that situation happening, but the tactics don't automatically cross over. That being said, we are in constant partnership with them and trying to learn from the way they handle business. So suicide by cop basically means when the subject engages in behavior which poses an apparent risk of serious injury or death with the intent to precipitate the use of deadly force by law enforcement personnel toward that individual. So generally, suicide by cop incidents are either spontaneous or pre-planned. We have seen in this country very elaborate schemes where a person sets fire to the house, the firefighters show up, Person then shoots at the firefighters, and the police officers show up, shoots at the police officers, and then the police officers shoot and kill. We find out later that there is a suicide letter. There's all this evidence that shows that the whole purpose was to complete suicide.
Excuse me 1 second. Officers, is somebody
Boxed in by a police truck.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
You'll get this information from studies about suicide blackout warning signs, things that we teach police officers to look out for. One of the questions that comes up is, can we walk away? And in that Richmond police video, you saw the officers walk away. They left the scene. And generally, the prevailing wisdom is, if you have a person who's barricaded in their own house, they're suicidal, don't have access to anybody else, then we should try to find a way to leave. Okay? We should not be shooting people who are suicidal. We should not be making entry into people's homes when they're in there by themselves and their goal is to commit suicide. Okay? And that has happened in this country. So we always want to look for ways to avoid that situation. This is a video where it wasn't necessarily managed the right way. So the family calls the police for a suicidal family member. He's hiding in the bathroom, armed with a knife. He's already stabbed himself. They set up a camera in the adjacent bedroom to film the police response. And this is how it played out. So I'm not going to show you the end of the video. Eventually the suspect, or the subject, he's a mental health subject, he needs to go to the hospital. He gets up, he comes toward the officer shoots and kills him, okay? Everything we talk about, can we walk away? Now it's more difficult when the family's there, right? It's like, this person is at their family house. So can we tell everybody in the family, hey guys, can we go away for a day or two, and when he calms down, we'll come back, or we'll send an ambulance. It's more complicated, but we do it. What we don't want to do is see a person who is trying to hurt himself, and then we kick the door in, and then we go in and make the situation worse.
You mean that was, what do you think that was?
That was kicking the door in and making the situation worse. Okay? That's what we want to avoid. Okay.
What's the right response to that?
Move everybody, get the family out, all the officers back up, get to maybe outside the house, and you know what? We don't want them to commit suicide, but we should not be killing suicidal people.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's extreme. Yeah, it is frustrating.
Is there a protocol around talking to the person, engaging them in any kind of conversation?
And later on in the video, the officer brings it down a notch. He starts to calmly talk to him. But the officer is in officer safety mode. He's not in verbal de-escalation mode. Can we agree? He's
not helping at all.
Yes. So that's what we want to teach police officers to avoid that. Yes.
But just to be clear, because you had a knife
once we can get everybody safely out of the way to the point of the video where the suspect ends up taking a hostage, we want to get mom and other family members out of harm's way, create space, because ultimately, if he commits suicide, he's already stabbed himself. That is a bad outcome, but we don't want to be the way that he commits suicide. Okay? And that's what officers need to recognize. They need to see that coming.
And the difference between that scenario and some of the other ones that we've seen is he's already contained. Once you, like I said, once you get the family out, there's no one else to harm but himself. And so in that situation, you can potentially bring up a mental health professional from outside the house and talk to him from outside the house. So that's the difference. Containment versus being out in the open.
So this is an example of one of the calls that I was on. You know, there's tons of them that have been captured in Berkeley side. This guy was driving around Oakland, ramming cars and pointing a gun at passersby. Like 911 calls were coming in, reporting the same person in the same vehicle, armed with a firearm, pointing it at people. Eventually, Oakland police found him and they started chasing him. And he got on the freeway and started heading toward Berkeley. So a couple of supervisors were at the station and were listening to the call. Like, okay, the vehicle that he was in was registered right around the corner on Russell Street. So, okay, one of my partners goes to Russell Street and I go with some other officers closer to the freeway. Sure enough, one of our officers sees him on foot, and this is what it looked like. So passerby starts recording. By this time he's already walking, but he's walking with his hands in his hoodie. We believe he has a gun. He's been pointing at people. And so now officers are starting to show up from all different jurisdictions. I think eventually there were officers from 4 different agencies, and I was the supervisor on the scene. So now I'm running around with my head cut off trying to control this chaos. Because the last thing I want to do is have everybody shoot this guy on my watch, right? So I'm trying to control that. I'm telling these officers at this point, I'm telling them to get behind cover, stay behind the trees, right? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? He runs away, okay? If we are out in the open, we're too close to him, and he flinches, and we end up shooting him, you know, that's a negative outcome. So how can we avoid that? Let's stay back. Eventually, one of our officers shows up on scene, has a less lethal weapon. I tell all the officers on scene, everybody stand by, we're going to use the less lethal weapon. Shoot him in the buttocks. He complies, goes down on the ground. We take him into custody. This is my face after avoiding tragedy. All right, he did not have a gun.
He didn't.
He did not have a gun on him. Okay?
But where did that come?
I believe he did have a gun.
They got rid of it.
Right. But if we treated that like, okay, we know for sure he has a gun, he's walking with his hands in his hoodie, he's telling us to shoot him, all these things. Now, we did everything we could to try to avoid that situation, and it worked out that time, okay? This was what I treat as a commendation. I have this in my office. Somebody wrote this. Thank you, BPD, February 10th, 2016. I happen to be a half block from BPD officers doing a great job, being brave and not using lethal force, while apprehending a fellow who was ramming cars and had a weapon today, February 10th, 2016. All right? I'll take it. You know, neighbors saw that and they said, all right, you guys did everything you could to avoid shooting. This is a good example. We use this as an example of how officers talk to a person who is attempting suicide like that.
I'm going to be out with this male subject right here across from Alejandro's Cafe. He was walking in the road and he's yelling.
He was walking on the sidewalk and I saw him. I was trying to watch him.
Hey, he's approaching me with something. He has a knife in his hand. He's yelling and screaming. Drop the knife!
New Mexico.
New Mexico.
Yeah.
209 Central. This male subject has a large knife in his hand and he keeps approaching me. Drop the knife!
Stage medical.
Hey, Sarge, I'm giving him commands from my PA to drop the knife, and he just keeps yelling. Mr. Padilla, it's Officer Chavez, man. Let's talk, okay? Mr. Padilla, it's not worth it, man. Let's talk. Let's talk. Mr. Padilla, stop. Stop! Stop, man. Hey, it's not worth it, dude. Drop the knife. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Hey, it's not worth it, bro. Me and you, we talked yesterday, okay? Hey, drop the knife, please. Drop the knife. Drop the knife, man. Mr. Padilla. Drop the knife, man. I don't give a fuck. We're going to shut up now. Drop it now. Stop. Hey, Mr. Padilla. It's not worth it, man. Just drop that knife, man. Come on. Hey, it's not worth it. It's not worth it, man.
So in that case, they used a taser and it worked, and they were able to take him in custody, get help with him, all right? So knife-related incidents, a lot of people are focused on. No, you can keep it up. You can keep it up. Thank you. A lot of people are focused on how we manage people with knives. So normally there's two differences. Either the person's in a standoff or the person is attacking officers. Okay. What I get to is equipment. So this is one of the things that you may see us use in the field, the wrap. So this is a device that's about 20 years old. We use this to secure people who are combative. And it's been essential to us not using excessive force and not injuring people during arrest and not having officers needed. All right, so you have the vest. This goes on the legs. This is the ankle strap. So
the three objectives of the wrap are as follows. Number one, stop the conflict quickly and control the subject in a safe and humane manner. With a shortened conflict, escalation of force dangers, lawsuits, civil liability, workers' comp claims, death, and injury are reduced for all parties involved. Number two, de-escalate the situation rapidly and get the subject to an upright and seated position of max respiratory recovery and get the subject the medical care they need quickly. Number three, safe and secure transportation with an easy carry, seatbelted vehicle ride, or recurring ride in an ambulance to the desired destination. And finally, the overall safety and perception benefits of a humane and caretaking approach to controlling non-cooperative subjects to the community is significant.
On camera involving law enforcement and the public has sparked debates on the use of excessive force. The Cedar Park Police Department hopes a new device will help them minimize force used in all cases. Today, KXAN's Amanda Brandeis got a first-hand look at how it works.
This is the ankle strap.
For officers like Rocky Two Pros, routine calls can turn hostile without warning.
When there's intoxication involved, there's surprises everywhere.
So we asked the department to buy these devices called the wrap.
It controls our use of force. Once we have the person under control, our use of force is pretty much, it ceases at that time.
Once a person is wrapped, they can't hurt themselves or officers. I was able to test it out and see how it works. First, officers put on the ankle straps, which prevent the person from kicking. The second piece is for their legs, and the last is for the upper body.
We'll have an officer push forward.
Officer Ducros says it's safer to restrain people upright in seating as opposed to face down.
The last time that I applied it,
So this is a couple of examples of us actually using it in the field, caught in media. So this is a sergeant deploying the RAP. Officers are on a combative person on shaddy, controlling his legs, staying off of his torso, deploying the RAP and doing it systematically. And this is another one where they've already have the subject sitting up. This is one of our mental health workers. So we can secure the person and keep them safe. The mental health clinician is right there with us, talking to that person, and we get them to the hospital.
Is the RAP considered a use of force?
We have to document every time we use the RAP.
I don't understand why, I mean, to put the RAP on, you've already got the person under control, or else you wouldn't be able to put it on.
No, we're talking about really violent fights. So when we're talking
Even
about
after the handcuffs and the ankle cuffs?
oh, yeah, it's people kick out windows, they kick officers.
When their ankles are cuffed?
Yes. Yes. We're talking about extreme violence. These people are sometimes on another planet mentally. This is a safe way for us to control them.
What's the standard for when that's utilized?
Basically, when a person is acting violently, this is not for routine arrest. This is when a person is kicking officers, punching officers, and physically fighting officers, somebody will call for it.
And how often do you use it here?
I don't know, we probably go months without ever using it on our shift. But we have them out of control. We've had great success with these. We have minimized injury to suspects and officers. So one of the things that you talked about earlier was spit hoods. So it is very common for people to spit on officers. We've had officers get spit in their eyes, in their mouths. Okay? That is not okay. The biohazards, a lot of people we deal with have communicable diseases. I wouldn't expect for you to stand and accept somebody spitting in your eye or spitting in your mouth. Okay? So this is one way we try to manage that. Yes.
So you want to manage that humanely. There is no mental health professional who would recommend putting a hood on somebody's head. Nor do medical doctors put hoods on people's heads. In terms of escalation and de-escalation, if somebody's already mentally dissociative or disorganized, that does not happen. And so if it's strictly, and I'm curious about what communicable diseases the police department feels like they're going to get from exposure to saliva.
So are you suggesting we should let people spit in our faces?
I am suggesting that if it's true that your order of life is what you claim it is, then I believe that's a dangerous situation. And let me explain why. Because in the policies that we've been given for the RAP device, it says that you have to monitor their facial coloring in order to be able to identify whether or not they are getting proper oxygen, whether or not they are asphyxiating on vomit or whatever is happening in their throat. So you cannot, in the absence of an actual care provider, you are the care provider.
Okay.
And so let me finish. Let me finish.
Okay.
Because this is very offensive on many levels, not only on a medical level, but if the police are so worried about officer safety, then I recommend that you all mask up. If you're that nervous about exposure to saliva, and I will remind you that educators, that anybody who interacts with the public is at a similar risk for saliva exposure that a police officer.
I understand your position.
And I'm telling you that the optics of that are very bad.
Okay, I get your point. You've said this for years. What I'm telling you is the officers are able to monitor people's breathing with the hood. The hood does not restrict anybody's breathing, does not keep the officers from monitoring them medically. All right? If you're talking about optics, so you're essentially saying that the officers should allow people to spit in their eyes and spit in their mouths.
Oh, really? That's what you heard me say? That's what you heard?
What is the alternative to
I just told you, you can mask up.
And goggle up. So they have to wear a mask and go. So police
I'm
officers.
sorry, what is the hazard? Are we worried about HIV? Have we not heard that HIV is not transmitted through
Tuberculosis can be
Hepatitis?
tuberculosis.
What is it we're actually?
Tuberculosis can be transferred to saliva.
What is this?
It can transfer to saliva. If you're gonna have saliva and it's saliva somebody spits in your eye. I mean, if somebody spits in your eye and it goes into your capillaries, into your blood with saliva, I mean, there's your chance. Well, but I think the bigger argument here is, whether police officers should be spit on. I think that's his major argument here. Whether we think that somebody who's violent, necessarily somebody who's in a 5150 designation on a mental condition or a mental health condition, whether we should allow anybody who's violent, who does on purpose want to spit at police officers, whether the police officer should not be allowed to use something which prevents that from happening. Whether we think that the public safety officers in our city of Berkeley, when they're doing the performance of their duties, deserve to be spit on. And I think the answer might be no. I mean, I understand that there might be circumstances in which it might be questionable to apply it, but I think the point is that the answer should be no.
Can I just add a point of order, because we're supposed to be, I mean, we focus on the de-escalation training. This issue we pulled out with respect to Lexapol, it's being put on a future agenda, so it seems like that's the appropriate way to speak about it, not, we're doing the de-escalation training.
Yeah, the point of this is to show you the tools. I know that you probably never get this training. Nobody ever comes and explains the tools we have and the way we use them. So that's the wrap. This is the spill. These are the less lethal options that most police officers use. So we have this launcher and this launcher. You may have seen us deploy them in the field. People look at them like they're space guns. These are less lethal weapons. When we deploy these, we're trying to use a lower level of force and not use a firearm. Some departments use beanbag shotguns. We do not. Obviously, we don't have tasers. We have pepper spray and we have
That gets foam baton?
foam baton, right? So I brought the actual projectiles. So this is a foam baton round, okay? This is what's called a 40 millimeter foam baton round. What you're looking at is, this black part is the actual projectile. Think of it like a hard Nerf ball and it passes around. The rest of this is the shell casing and it operates just like a firearm. So the gun strikes the primer, causes the projectile to go down the barrel, and this is the part that hits the subject, okay? This is the projectile for the other weapon, the FN-303, it's plastic. Okay, so when you hear people use the term rubber bullets, police in the US do not use rubber bullets, okay? You look at all the protests, we had 12 protest days last year, nobody died. You look at protests that happened in other countries, like 300 people died at protests, right? We are using these. We are not using rubber bullets. We're not using real black ammunition.
Are you using those other ones, the plastic ones?
Yes.
And what is the?
And what are they called?
The weapon is called an FN-303. FN-303. It's the one with the on the left at the top.
So those two guns there shoot these.
Right. So the small one shoots out of this. The plastic round shoots out of this, and the foam baton round shoots out of a gun that it's like.
What's the result? What are they?
Bruises. The level of force is equivalent to a baton. So if I can hit somebody with a baton, then I can shoot them with that.
And it incapacitates somebody?
No, not necessarily. And I'm going to show you how that works here in a
Do
second.
you use the wooden dowels or
No.
the shaver rounds as well?
So what's the purpose of these if they don't incapacitate someone?
They are a less lethal option, just like you saw in some of the other
It
videos.
stops them from what they're doing.
Hopefully. But there's no magic.
They don't fall to the ground? You can't use this on a night building person?
Yes, we do, but it all depends on that person's pain tolerance. If they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, if they're really motivated, sometimes it doesn't work. So these are target areas. So everything in the red are the areas that we're trying to avoid. The primary areas are the meaty portions of the legs. So generally, when the officers shoot, they're going to try to shoot in the thighs. Okay? This is an example of use of less lethal by another agency. So this person chased social workers out of his house with a knife, and now he's out on the street.
He's armed with a knife or a gun?
He has a knife. He has 2 knives, actually.
Pat, put that knife down. You need to stay there. Stay there, Pat. You're gonna have to provide lethal too, Pat. Pat, stay there. I don't want you to get hurt. Stop. Wait, stop. Wrong car. Pat. Put that knife down, Pat. Now. Put it down. Pat, put the knife down. Now. Pat, put that knife down. Terry, dog. Okay. Put it down. Put it down on the ground. Get down.
Oh, that was a police dog.
Yep.
Oh, God.
All right. So that's an example of use of less lethal. All right. So if you're, yes.
Well, we were going to break. I just had a question related to the
Oh, sure. We can go. You can ask.
It's really for POA because we're here. Thank you for coming. I know we talked to the
Sergeant Rock, thank you.
I'm just curious, not for debate. I'm just like here. I'm not saying that there's going to be dogs in Berkeley, but I'm just I see these other less than lethal options that are being utilized. Does the POA? Is there any other option or any less than lethal options that you guys would prefer that you think that you should have available that you don't?
Tasers.
Anything else?
I think with the systems that we have, the FN303 and the various 40mm launchers we have, tasers would supplement that as a nice alternative option. You know, the problem with those systems are they're not always on. They're in vehicles that are spread throughout the city. So if I'm having a contact with somebody and you really get out a less lethal system, aside from a baton and pepper spray, I've got to wait for that asset to get there. Where tasers issued to every officer like baton and pepper spray, I immediately have access to it. So that would supplement what we have very well.
So we're finishing up the last 2 slides. I'm going to show you BPD. So we talked about what is BPD doing, right? I'm going to show you 2 videos. Unfortunately, it happens to be the same subject, okay? A person that we deal with on a regular basis. So he has, without going into all of his business, he uses stimulants. And this night, I was not on this call, so my teammates were on this call. On this night, he was prowling. Neighbors called in, said that he was attempting to break into a house. He ran from the officers in the dark. He ran up these stairs and ended up being trapped. The officers isolated his position, attempted to negotiate with him literally all night. So this is the next morning. I think they were at, yeah, it's like 6 or 7 hours they're trying to talk to him. Now during the course of the negotiation, he pulls out a methamphetamine pipe, and obviously that didn't help things. So eventually they determined there was no way that they were going to be able to talk him down. They had professional negotiators on scene, they had mental health clinicians. They brought out an ID test. So what you're looking at is the view from a camera that we set up, right? So I know some people believe that we don't want cameras. We wanted cameras a long time ago. All right, the officers want the body cam so we can record what we're doing. We had to set up cameras so that we made sure that if this turned out, if it went the wrong way, that we recorded exactly all the steps we took. So what you'll see here is, at this point, right? So our ultimate goal is to make sure that he goes and gets the help that he needs, okay? We can make a tactical intervention earlier. We can, we have the skills and the tactics to do that. We're trying to talk him down. Now, what is the balance, right? Do we sit and talk to every single person who does that for 6, 7, 8 hours? I don't know. We are doing our best to get him where he needs to go without hurting him. He went to the hospital with bruises. Okay. He was alive. I went to a special assignment. My first critical incident when I came back to patrol was the same guy. Okay, so I'm a street supervisor. We get a call of a male prowling. The neighbors call and saying, this guy's in here, I don't know what he's doing. The officers contact him. He had just smoked methamphetamine. He comes out, he brandishes a knife. He has a knife around his neck. He has a canister of pepper spray in his back pocket. I get down there. When I get down there, this is the scene that I see. He's staged in a standoff.
There's not enough mental health at all for the practitioners to have people like this after run a rig and let them all out. You know, it's sad that we don't have the resources to take care of people that need help.
So in this situation, so the question came up, are those effective? Did they do anything to him? He ran at us. I've shown this to officers around the country, and they all say they would have shot him. Okay?
You know, what happened, what I know is because he was so full of drugs, maybe the drug effect and that is just not gonna work.
It's not gonna work. He has to feel pain.
Yeah, and you can't feel it if you're that high.
So that was our intent. I sat down with the chief of police and I showed him that. I walked him through and said, look, chief, this is what I do, all right? I'm trying not to kill this guy. I'm doing everything I can to try. This is what I consider, this is the best practice, all right? Keep your distance, talk to the person. Less lethal, get the ambulance staged, all the things. I did everything I thought of, I could think of. Let's videotape it, okay? And I'm thinking, if we kill this guy, how am I going to explain the outcome? Because what people want is a perfect outcome. I can't give you that. Right? I can do my best, and I can make sure that we have everything in place, and we can use the best practices and the best tactics. But the guy's running at us, and fortunately, you know, I'll put him on the spot. The officer who was covering the less lethal officer, Sergeant Ross. Sergeant Ross's job was lethal cover. Sergeant Ross's job was to shoot him if he posed a threat to us. He ran right up to us with a knife, and he did not shoot him.
How did the guy fell onto the ground? How did he go down?
Just eventually.
He just tripped on his own, or did he?
No, he ran towards two officers with less lethal. One had the 40 millimeter with 6 rounds in it. One had the FN with 15 rounds in it. He was shot 21 times when he ran at us with less lethal when he started to go down. I actually transitioned from my frame.
From the.
Presumably. I transitioned from my frame to my trigger, and I was about to shoot him when he started going down. Something I perceived it, and he went down.
So when he went down, did he maintain the knife, or did he let
He dropped it, we cuffed him, we got him to the hospital.
I thought you said earlier, before you showed the video, that you negotiated knives away from him.
That was a different video. That was a different event. This is the same guy.
Oh, I see.
Different event. Yeah. So, we'll finish with this, but what I see in the future, standardization of tactics. Around the country, we have to standardize the way police deal with these situations and develop best practices. CIT is going to be mandatory training for all police officers. All right, there's going to be a 40-hour block in the academy. Everybody's going to have it.
When is that coming?
I'm just saying, this is my prediction.
That's your dream,
right? So eventually, everybody is going to have to get this training. They're going to have to know how to manage these situations. It's not getting better. More access to less lethal weapons in the field. Like officers or agencies that don't have, I showed this to officers in a major city, they don't have launchers. So what are you going to do if a guy is standing there and he won't? So what are you going to do? Say, well, we may end up shooting him. Okay? We need more less lethal. Officers need to have access to it. The tactical training has to be more realistic for patrol officers. You know, we have to give them training that prepares them for everything that might happen in the field. We can't water that down. We have to continue to educate the public on the human dynamics of use of force. Right? There's just too many people that watch TV and they think that's how things play out. There is a whole body of science that studies how things really unfold in human confrontations. Questions? Yes.
So that's your ideal future. When you talk to us about Graham v. Garner and the Tennessee v. Garner standards for department's all about a reasonable officer, but in general, they find that it's what the officer does. Your practices in Berkeley are best practices that have a higher threshold or a lower threshold, however you want to look at it, than these legally defensible. So how would you, if you could craft a judicial decision or a statute that would produce these results, that your ideal future? I mean, Graham v. Garner, in my opinion, is just not sufficient. It's not. It becomes subjective to whatever the police officer does.
Well, it's meant to be objectively reasonable.
Yes, and how do you judge what's objectively reasonable? That's what officers in the field do. It's kind of tautological.
Well, it's actually the people who are evaluating the use of force. Like in your case, as this body, if any of those videos I just showed you, you would sit back and say, was the use of force objectively reasonable in that situation, right? So that's a standard that the Supreme Court has established. I don't know that the standard, I don't know how you craft a different standard. If you look at the variation of videos we've seen today, from a person who takes a hostage in a static situation to the way that we deal with things.
It's difficult to craft a standard that doesn't become, but some people talk about necessary as opposed to, Anyway, I was just asking your personal opinion.
Yeah.
Since you all do it differently, you have a lower tolerance, it's obvious that it's possible. So can't we have statutes or?
I think what we should do, I'm not gonna overstep the wisdom of the Supreme Court. What I would say is we can improve the response of officers on the ground. We can improve the training, the equipment, the supervision. We can create a more standardized approach, and we can change the culture of policing, which is really probably the most important thing, is change the way that officers look at that. The way that I looked at that situation on the ground was, this guy needs to go to the hospital, he's not going to the morgue. Okay? So,
but that's the point. The Supreme Court evaluated was reasonably objectively at the moment to be judged to be used reasonably for force. But the Supreme Court did not engage in what it is the biggest power the police officers have, which is discretion.
Right.
You folks have the discretion to use whatever level of force you think is needed. But the Supreme Court has said whether it is reasonable for you to have applied the use of force at the moment based on your best judgment, right? So my question to you is, to tack on this is, how do you think that the other police departments in the Bay Area, and there's 2 right now that are using a minimal use of force, in which as a directive with de-escalation and discretion, they're saying that they're striving to use the least amount of force necessary in order to achieve an objective, and that is San Francisco and the Berkeley Police Department. How does that conflict, if it conflicts at all?
I would say that I think I've demonstrated that we also try to use the least amount of force. The problem I have with the word minimal is, what's minimal? In any given situation, minimal is not using force at all.
Yeah, well, that's the problem.
Which is subjective.
Necessary is also subjective, right? I mean,
You can't have you will use the minimum amount of force. Well, the minimum amount of force is me not touching this person, not using any weapons, not doing anything. That's why the Supreme Court decided it should be objectively reasonable. Is it reasonable with an officer with the same training, knowing the same circumstances, based on the information we knew, the totality of circumstances, without 20/20 hindsight, would another officer do the same thing? That's objective. I don't think you can make a minimal standard. What's minimal?
But that's the point, right? What's minimal is defined. What minimal is, what are tools within your toolbox do you have when you're assessing a situation and you're going to use of force? And by using those tools in your box, whether again is your discretion, what is the use of force needed, we no longer work in a use of force continuum. We know that. That's been proven to be false. It didn't work for anyone. You don't need to escalate based on the amount of force the person is applying towards you. You can go from A to Z if you need to, based on your evaluation of what the condition is at the time. We get all that. But whether the use of discretionary, in terms of the use of force is under your discretion, under your ability to use, and you're from de-escalation techniques and CIT training, whether that gets into the point of using minimal use of force, because you're choosing to use the minimal amount of force necessary to affect the change. It doesn't take away the fact that you have a right, under Graham v. Garner, to use reasonable use of force, but whether your first impulse, your first evaluation of the process by which you're engaging has to be reasonable. And if it's reasonable as your first object, the first object of your evaluation, whether a less standard, which is not the baseline of the law, is applicable, and that's where minimal comes in.
Yeah, I don't think you can legislate, and I don't think you can write it in policy without handicapping the officers.
But there's two of them already, right?
I don't agree with them. So what I would say is you can have tactics that minimize your use of force based on the way you do business. De-escalation should apply.
And here's the word strive.
De-escalation applies when the officers don't have to take immediate action. If the officers need to take immediate action, you say you will use the minimum amount of force. Now the officers have violated policy.
And the point is that when you're having someone here, your conversation is that you use minimal weapons, but other police officers in other situations have told you that they were chosen to shoot the person. Whether that is not a minimal use of force, the minimal use of force was a verbal judo and the engagement and the less than lethal weapons. And that's what the condition is, whether it's striving to use that doesn't go against reasonable use of force, doesn't take away the discretion from the police officer, but it sets a much different evaluation on the forefront before the action is taken. But I'm taking enough time.
Yeah, a policy I would probably agree to is if something that said, you put that de-escalation definition into policy that says, when you can, you should try to de-escalate. When you can, you should try to talk the person down. You should try to keep your distance. You should do all these things when you can. When you need to take immediate action in Graham versus Garner, Tennessee versus Garner apply.
Yeah, and I answered my first question. I have a second question, which is back to the POA. Do you guys think that you guys have enough training in the area of de-escalation? Too much training? Not enough training?
I believe in training on everything as much as we can. So we can never be too good at anything. We can always use more. We can always, in this city, you get a lot of on-the-job training and doing. We do it every day. So we can always use more, but
do you think it's sufficient?
I think ongoing, continuing training would be sufficient. Like we have the baseline. The new officers that come in, they get the baseline training. Updates, continual updates, which we do, is sufficient.
Well, let me just follow up then, because I feel like, first of all, I appreciate, I just want you to understand, I appreciate the desire to minimize that use of force. I think it matters a bit. I also wonder if see, the reason why I'm interested in who, if anybody, like what I can imagine, it gets a little odd because if officers in the field could tell the difference between somebody who was high and somebody who was bipolar, and somebody who was schizophrenic, and the variety of mental health disorders that are on the streets, or what you're seeing, there's a higher level of how that could influence your tactics, how that could influence how you move. I don't know how that, and that's why I and some others feel that it's important to it would just be such a game changer if the police department was demanding more funding and more mental health professionals have access, be deployed in those situations, that they were managing the scene and say, oh wait, this person is catatonic, they're not resistant, they're not able to respond to you. That there's that kind of variety. And so I don't know how that would ever come to be. I feel pretty stuck.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. When I had an opportunity to speak at the National Alliance for Mental Illness Conference, That was my main message to all of these people who are professionals or have family members who are totally invested in this. I had a slide that said big picture. Okay, what's the big picture? Big picture is we have tons of people who need to be in inpatient care or serious outpatient care, and we have no resources.
Yeah.
And the police are the first responders to when these people go into crisis. That's the big picture. And I think we all agree that we'd rather have a professional mental health clinician contacting these people than a police officer. Okay? So I'm with you, and I totally agree. And in my world, we would have response teams of mental health clinicians who are out in the field. I agree.
Why is that not happening?
Yeah.
Where, I don't know, is it a county-funded process? Is it a city-funded process?
We have our own mental health department right here in Berkeley, and we're sitting on millions of dollars.
Can I ask a question to follow up on what Commissioner Calavita talked about? And this is getting back to sort of policy versus constitutional law. Again, back to the Supreme Court standard. Again, to me, all that says is this is the measure of discretion a police officer can exercise and not operate illegally. You violate that standard, you're literally violating the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. So, understanding that that's the full breadth of discretion that could potentially be given to a police officer, do you think that in any way that discretion, which is constitutionally permissible, understanding that as the primary, should that in any way, do you think, be restricted, that discretion to foster de-escalation?
Yeah, I think, okay, if you look at any individual agency's use of force policy, it is restricted. Our use of force policy is more restricted than Graham versus Garner or Tennessee versus Garner. We cannot, the policies, or the case law does not define every single scenario. So our city has defined, our PD has defined what our policy states. So yes, if you go to, and George, you obviously deal with lots of policy. You look at policies from different agencies. A city can, a police department can make a more restrictive policy. It really depends on what it says and how it applies in the field. My main concern is, I think you can emphasize de-escalation. I think that you can emphasize sanctity of life, the tactics we want to use, and the goal of getting people the help they need without saying you will use the minimum amount of force. That's just going to put officers in a really bad spot. Because if I evaluate officers' use of force and you tell me they have to use the minimum, I'm like, violation of policy, all day. Because you cannot use if I pull out my baton, George says, Fomby, was that the minimum you could have done? Well, no. Right?
What if I tell you that the last year of implementation in San Francisco use of force cases, even with a lower standard, with a higher standard of reporting, have fallen by 30% and the bar have fallen by 62%. Not because the police officers will say, well, because we're no longer engaging people more, because we know that is a more restrictive policy. But what the other argument is, because you're de-escalating most of the time and looking for a second option, maybe you're not involving using much more direct force. So I think it's still open for discussion.
Yeah, but I think
for evaluation.
If you had an open conversation, honest conversation, offline with officers,
I have.
They'll tell you we're not engaging. We're not going to put ourselves in a situation where we're violating policy or violating the law.
It's a balance between your safety and everything else.
And your career.
Yeah, it's understandable.
Sorry, before there's any more questions, it is 10 o'clock, so just keep that in mind.
We're getting warm.
If we have a few more questions, but we usually do end our meetings at 10.
And public comment.
There's no public comment.
No public comment?
This is a pure conversation. And your class is an AR class. Does your class also account for crowd control de-escalation, or is that a whole different class?
No, that's completely different.
So the Berkeley regulations are more stringent than the Graham v. Garner.
Yes.
And you talked about your ideal of standardization. So how about standardizing across the country in this stricter way?
Well, another thing I talk about when I say the big picture So the big picture in law enforcement is there's 18,000 police agencies, and they all have their own executive, which means we have 18,000 different cultures, different policies. I would love to see, you know, the UK, Australia model where we standardize.
Standardization.
Yeah, sure. That's why I work on the national level to try to influence what everybody's doing. But to regulate it on a national level, I don't see that.
So we do not have public comment on the agenda as of right now, but we will take 1 to 2 questions from the public, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, one comment that I had is that in listening to those tapes, none of which I'd seen before, what I noticed is that in all of them except the one, the New Mexico tape, I mean, there seemed to be this real panic in the police officer, and you know, it just felt like that accelerated. But my I have two questions. One, is there a national shortage of police officers? Do we have fewer people going into policing, creating the shortage? And then, do you think that since you graduated from Howard, do you think our culture is more violent now? Are you dealing with more violence now than some years ago?
I would say to the first question, anecdotally, yes, we have less people who want to be police officers. And statistically, if you look at how many people apply, you know, we used to have hundreds of people who apply to be police officers. Nobody wants to jump into this fire. All right, so it's not.
So to speak.
Yeah, and if you look at it and say, especially when we're trying to recruit minority officers, which is one of my focuses, policing is the least popular profession in the African American community. Okay, and I talk to my peers who are academics and business people and all across the board. I have some, you know, some very progressive friends. And so look, if you want people to represent your community, then we have to stop demonizing the profession. All right, I think we could recruit tons of people who are educated, young professionals who want to go into policing, but that's a whole bigger discussion. I'm sorry, your second question is?
Okay, well, I'm a nurse, and you know, we've seen a big, since women had other choices in career, we saw a big drain of, you know, people going into nursing.
Yeah.
So the second question was, do you think that the culture that you're dealing with now is increasingly more violent?
I would say if we just look at the numbers, it is safer in the United States than it was in years past. Okay, so I'm not here to sell you some message that policing is more dangerous than it's ever been. It is not.
Okay.
You know, that being said, I have been shot at. I have had people try to kill me. It's not fun. All right.
While at work?
It can happen anywhere.
While at work?
While at work.
Yeah. Well, I've had people try to kill me too, but they have their hands on me.
Yes. So I actually have one question, one comment. My question is, in the instance of somebody, there's a call, and they say the person looks to have a gun, and they're pointing it. Is it the officer's immediate response to assume that it's a gun because it's said that it's a gun? Or when they arrive on scene, wherever that is, do they have enough time to tell whether it's an actual gun or not? I mean, it's silver. I saw a video about, a phone, and it looked like a gun. It's a famous video on YouTube.
So
that's one thing.
Even in the city of Berkeley, we respond to a man, we call man with a gun. Man with a gun call is kind of a common call. Our officers, unless they're getting information that person is shooting people, like actively shooting people, what they normally do is keep their distance and try to observe before they go running in. And that's how we systematically avoid getting into shootouts or shooting the wrong person, is you stop, observe. If you heard gunshots and people screaming, now you have to take action. Otherwise, use tactics. Use cover, call out to the person. You want to challenge that person from a distance. All those things we do systematically. So we are going to assume that the caller or the witness or the victim really believes that person is armed with a gun. We're going to to treat it that way. But that doesn't mean we go in guns blazing.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, I just had a comment, and one thing that I take away here from this meeting, and thank you very much for coming out and teaching us, is how very important training is, bottom line. And as much training as you guys, are poured on. I've, participated in your active shooter drill, and it was something else. And, like when we hear about the San Pablo Park shooting, I wasn't there, but at City Council we heard the parents, and I was about to cry. Their children were, being shot at. It's a normal day. All these people could have been shot, and it's very important for our officers to know what they're doing on the spot and to have as much training, I think, as possible. I've even, gone to Urban Shield, as you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your commitment to this training, for coming here today. We really do appreciate it. It's very illuminating. We needed this.
Thanks for having me. And again, if there are other topics related to use of force, if you want, I did a presentation for the Urban Shield Subcommittee on the Special Response Team. If you want to actually know how we train, the equipment we use, I'd be happy to do that presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.